Chapter 1087. Who is it? Brando asked. A man from Cruise. He said he was looking for us. When we met this guy, he was being hunted down. We saved him from the cult. As Charles spoke, he waved his hand behind him. The bushes rustled, and a young man in ragged clothes walked out from within. The young man's face was pale, and he looked like he was still in shock. His grayish-blue eyes were filled with vigilance. Finally, his gaze landed on Brando. Brando felt that the young man looked familiar at first glance. Then, he remembered that he had seen the young man before. It was near the Cat and Beard Inn. Judging from how close he was with the young waitress, they must be lovers. He remembered that the two of them went out together, but now, only the young man had returned. Something must have happened. However, the city was in chaos right now, so it wasn't surprising that anything would happen. Fortunately, the girl named Seti was a kind and easygoing girl. Zhang Heng frowned. Subconsciously, he hoped that nothing would happen to her. If something were to happen to her at this time, even he wouldn't be able to help her. He thought for a moment and asked, "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Although the young man named Alcra was down and out, his mind was still clear. He said, "My lord, please help us. The secret society's disciples want to use Seti to deal with you." Brando immediately became alert. "What do you mean? What's going on?" Alcra then repeated the conversation he heard between the secret society's disciples in his own language. Brando realized that the young man's language skills were outstanding. In just a few sentences, he was able to describe the whole incident. Brando was furious. He did not want to provoke the secret society, but he did not expect them to come knocking on his door. He was worried for a while, but then he remembered that the Roman had white mist with him. He calmed down a little. No matter what, the girl was just an ordinary person, and white mist was the contracted spirit of the witch empress. The chance of poisoning white mist was too slim. The tree herders obviously did not think of this. Only then did he put away his worries and notice the suspicious points in the young man's words. However, before he could say anything, Charles, who was beside him, voiced his thoughts first. "These people are really digging their own graves." The Shire frowned. Fortunately, the Roman lady had white mist with her. Otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. But how did they know the relationship between the Roman lady and my lord? Alcra was worried about Seti, but he knew that both of them were responsible for this incident. He hesitated for a moment before replying, "I'm sorry, Seti and I told them. The conclave has many informants in Rushta and most of them are ordinary people like us. We only told them that there were guests in the inn, but we didn't know that the young lady was your fiancée." Old Nydivan, who was watching from the side, suddenly spoke. "There's no doubt that only the people around Her Majesty the Queen would know your identity, and the only one who has the motive to order the cultists to do such a thing is that person. It seems like our previous guess was correct." "What guess?" Charles had not experienced the previous discussion, so he could not help but be confused when he heard this. "It's the Dragon Queen." Medisa walked over and answered. She then explained to Nydivan about Prime Minister Nydivan's speculations. The young wizard's servant couldn't help but reveal a rather shocked expression. He pondered for a moment before saying, "It's that baby girl from back then." "What did you say?" Brando immediately looked at the Shire. The Shire slapped his forehead. "I suddenly remember a lot of things. Remember when you asked me about Miss Amandina's father and Bragg's? I suddenly remembered that I was looking for something just like them." "What is it? Are you Mr. the Shire?" Brando and old Nydivan asked at the same time, but old Nydivan was obviously more confused. He looked at the Shire carefully. "Why are you still so young?" The Shire did not answer the question. Instead, he continued. "Perhaps it's the answer to a question. It's like a clue scattered in my mind. I often remember looking for something in the Alcala region, but there's no systematic answer. It's like a fragmented dream after a long sleep. Then what is it? What I remember is not the same as what Mr. Tolman said. I remember that your grandfather and the princess brought back a baby girl. That baby girl was wrapped in a piece of bright amber. That night, only Shippard, Tamid, and I witnessed it. That's right, Shippard is Miss Amandina's father. What happened at that time? Old Nydiven's voice was trembling, like a puzzle that had been pursued for decades and was finally about to be solved. At this moment, it had nothing to do with the Queen, the Imperium, or even the truth itself. Even in his dreams, the old man was troubled by the puzzle itself that was made up of countless complicated knots. Brando pursed his lips. This puzzle had also troubled him for a long time. I remember that Her Royal Highness wasn't in a good condition at that time. Oh, that's Her Royal Highness today. She looked very weak and emotionally unstable. She avoided us and secretly discussed with your grandfather for a long time. In the end, your grandfather brought the baby girl out and asked us to find a reliable person to send her away. He also asked us to keep this a secret. Her Majesty was not in good condition at that time. How bad was it? Were there any obvious external injuries? Old Nydiven asked. No, there were none. But she looked very weak, as if she was suffering from a serious illness. Her mental state was also very unstable. I remember that she was against taking the baby girl away for a while, and sometimes she was sobbing softly. She seemed very helpless. Of course, this is my personal judgment. What about Mr. Darius? Mr. Darius' face looked very heavy. Was that before or after? What before, what after? Before or after Her Majesty entered the final battlefield? Old Nydiven asked loudly. The Shire looked at the former Prime Minister of the Empire strangely and replied, of course it was after. They brought the baby girl out from there. Before that, how was Her Majesty? Very good. There was nothing wrong. Old Nydiven took a deep breath and seemed to be a little hesitant. The others were far away and did not understand what was going on. They thought that they were arguing. The sound of the argument spread far away. A few stray dogs were wandering around the edge of the forest. When they saw the crowd, they ran away with their tails between their legs. Someone saw a fire in the direction of Rushte. The stars lit up the dark night sky. The air was filled with the smell of dryness and burning. Are you sure that the baby girl was wrapped in amber, the Shire? Brando asked. The Shire nodded. What happened after that? We found a reliable person in the Alliance. Your father's fiancée, Princess Gloria, who was serving as the envoy of Erewhon in the Alliance at that time, entrusted her to bring the baby girl back to Erewhon overnight. What happened after that? Did you see her? Later, when I returned to Erewhon, I saw her once. It was about 3 years after the Holy War, in a small town near Ranner. What about the baby girl? The Shire shook his head. I did not ask, and she did not say. I only asked her some things about your grandfather. Some things about my grandfather. Yes. For days after we sent the baby girl away, the Bugis and dragons arrived. Her Highness' attitude was very cold, and what she described was completely different from what happened at that time. This meant that your grandfather had to take the blame for her. The three of us who knew the inside story did not understand. We asked your grandfather about it, but he was not willing to say more. You know what happened after that? The young wizard sighed. For the next few decades, the three of us have been searching for the answer to this question. Now it seems that the one closest to the truth should be Shippard, but he died too early. Brando looked at him deeply and replied, perhaps you are the same, the Shire. The Shire paused for a moment before he reacted, perhaps, my lord. Brando looked at the old Prime Minister beside him. The old man's face was a mixture of confusion and contemplation. I seem to have grasped something, but I always feel that there is a layer of window paper between us. This feeling is really uncomfortable. The latter could not help but shake his head. No matter what the truth is, we have to be on our way. Perhaps when we meet Her Highness, we will be able to answer the last question in our hearts. He glanced at the burning city of Rushta and gently closed the form in his pocket watch. At this moment, Alcra, who had been staring at little Nydivan beside old Nydivan, suddenly asked carefully, "You are the Prime Minister?" Little Nydivan was slightly taken aback. Not many people around his father would address him that way. But when he saw the latter, he immediately understood. In the entire empire, there were not many people who could associate him with the title of Prime Minister of the Empire. But in Rushta and the surrounding areas, there were still many who could recognize him. He nodded silently. Alcra could not help but look at the others present. He could not recognize many of these nobles. He originally thought that they were just Brando's servants, but little Nydivan's appearance had obviously changed his opinion. When his gaze fell on old Nydivan, he could not help but feel even more complicated. He almost could not believe it. The old Prime Minister was at the peak of his power in the Empire, but after the death of Grand Emperor Grandocrates, he also lived in seclusion for decades. If not for the fact that he looked somewhat similar to little Nydivan, Alcra would not have believed that this was the legendary figure in front of him. Once he was convinced of this, the way he looked at Brendel was completely different. "My lord." He carefully lowered his head and spoke respectfully. Brando glanced at him. Although this young man and the girl's actions might cause trouble for him, he knew that they had no choice. Besides, Seti's brother did die on the battlefield of Ampere Seal. Although he was not the one who started the war, he could not blame the girl. Perhaps this was the biggest mistake of the Holy Cathedral and Her Majesty. They had unknowingly changed the fate of many people, but they had never felt guilty about it. This kind of arrogance had been deeply rooted in the nobles' hearts for hundreds of years. He replied, "Don't worry. The white mist knows what it is doing. Seti is just an ordinary person. It will not do anything to her." Alcra did not know who the white mist was, but such a noble made him feel at ease. He looked at little Nydivan and the old Prime Minister and could only feel relieved. Not to mention, this noble servant had saved his life. After a moment of silence, he said, "My lord, if you want to enter the city, I may know of a secret passage that can take you into the inner city." Secret passage? Brando was stunned. The nobles in the inner city built the passage. The priests of the conclave bribed these nobles. "I happen to know where the exit of one of the secret passages is," Alcra replied. Brando was not interested in the secret passage itself. He only asked, "Is the passage guarded by the cultists? Are they the ones you mentioned?" "Yes, but there aren't many people there on normal days. That secret passage is very remote and the entrance isn't big. It's a backup passage for the priests." He looked at the others present and calculated in his mind. "But I think it should be enough to pass through your subordinates." So the cultists prepared these secret passages for many people to pass through. Alcra paused for a moment. It was obvious that Brendel's question was out of his expectations, but he was a smart young man and immediately realized where the problem lay. He frowned and replied, "I'm not too sure, but I think that's the case." "You said you know the location of one of the secret passages. Are there many of them?" Brando asked again. "Not many, but there should be more than 2 or 3. Old Nydivan's eyes flashed as he listened to the conversation. "The inner city is in danger. This is our chance," little Nydivan said excitedly. Little Nydivan seemed rather excited. "Her Majesty is too arrogant. Perhaps Dragon Queen Gwendolyn has deceived her. The tree shepherds must have made preparations. The problem is, we still don't know what she is after." There is no need to know, Brando replied softly, we will not take the secret passage. Not the secret passage. Alcor really did not understand what this noble was thinking. Brando's face was cold as he replied coldly, before we meet Her Majesty, we will collect our debt. Chapter 1088. Praise the slaughter, praise the death, praise the war, praise the bloody land. Thy name, written in the name of blood, spreads in the depths of hell. The howling north wind is thy blade, and sickness and old age are thy spear. Thou is undefeated, undying, and undying. When we recite thy name, thou shalt return to this land once more. Great Frederick, you are the master of all, the end of all things. The buzzing noises in the square converged into one, like the moans of a dying patient lingering in everyone's ears. Streams of blood flowed between the mud and the cracks of the stone slabs, like red snakes, wriggling and spreading, dyeing the ground under everyone's feet crimson. In the sky above the roofs of different heights, the flames reflected the night sky red. Columns of thick smoke were rising into the sky under the night sky. Sparks floated in the rising hot air above the entire imperial capital, like a river of starry light. Far away from the square, the archbishop raised his head, lifted his thick cloak with his hands covered in age spots, and looked at the scene piously. He spoke in a low and hoarse voice. 30 years ago in Metz, I dreamed of all of this today. I saw with my own eyes the black flames emerging from the ground, turning this decaying empire into ashes. The young believers looked at the archbishop with reverence. For those who lived in the darkness, the Great Purge 30 years ago was a memorable one. In any village in East Metz, countless witches, wizards who practiced black magic, and those who were declared to be heretics were dragged out of their houses every day, either hanged or burned at the stake. That was the darkest period in East Metz. Although the evil forces were severely suppressed, the local production state was also stagnant. After all, no one could stop dissatisfied people from using the name of the Holy Cathedral to attack dissidents. The end result was that the villages in East Metz were empty, and had not recovered to this day. Ironically, the merciless slaughter did not stop the spread of darkness. On the contrary, the fear and desolation in the countryside provided the heretics with the soil to survive. In fact, in the decades after the Holy Cathedral's purge, the Holy Cathedral's control over the countryside in East Metz had weakened. Most of these young people were believers who had developed after that. They had never seen that cruel era, but through word of mouth within the sect, they had a considerable understanding of the horrors of that era. For the older generation of believers who had survived that era, their hearts were full of reverence. However, compared to the archbishop, the flames of revenge in these young people's hearts were not inferior to the old ones. It was as if only by turning this 1,000-year-old imperial capital into ruins could they satisfy their desire to destroy everything in their hearts. Everyone's eyes were filled with fanaticism. At the bottom of the square, the secret society's believers in black robes walked forward in a row, holding sharp blades in their hands. Every time they came close to a row of kneeling citizens on the ground, they would press down on their necks and pierce their hearts with their blades. The pain of dying woke the people from their delusions. The dead struggled to turn their heads to see their murderers like livestock being slaughtered. Blood foam gushed out from their mouths, and the light in their eyes dimmed. The believers quickly laid the lifeless corpses flat, allowing the blood to mix with the soil and flow on the square. However, most of them did not even have the chance to resist. They twitched and fell to the ground. Row after row, they were like lambs being slaughtered. The believers moved quickly. In just a few moments, the back half of the square was left with rows of corpses intertwined with each other. The air was filled with the thick smell of blood. The blood flowed to the center of the square as if it was summoned by something. The statue of the knight stood in the center of the square, holding a sword in one hand and looking coldly at the scene. The light from the surrounding torches cast a huge shadow on its face. It looked like this hero of the past was shrouded in a gloomy aura. However, the believers in the front row turned a blind eye to everything that was happening. They chanted devoutly. The blood did not reach the knees of the people in front, but they still knocked their heads on the ground and worshipped in fear and trepidation. It was as if there was a voice in their hearts telling them, "I am your master, and I will give you everything, whether it is revenge or eternal life." The bishop looked at the scene with satisfaction. The rioting people were gathering in the inner city under the instigation of the tree herders. They set everything in sight on fire. Under the fanatical atmosphere, the people gradually lost their minds. They were usually careful to protect their property, but now there was only one thought in their minds. Loot, burn, and destroy everything. The scene in front of them was just a reflection of the entire Rushta. In the entire imperial city, there were dozens of such ceremonies in different places. As long as a third of them were successful, they would be able to summon the gift that they had been preparing for a long time. This was a great gift for the empire that was about to disappear. It used to be so arrogant that no one thought that the empire built by one of the four sages, the Flame King Gretel, would one day come to an end. Even if countless kingdoms and duchies fell and disappeared over the centuries, the four great empires still stood at the peak of civilization. They did not even fade in the slightest. But by chance, all the coincidences gathered here. It gave them the moment to control and overturn the fate of this behemoth. He couldn't help but think of his experience in Metz decades ago, the arrogant attitude of the knights and nobles of the Holy Cathedral. The empire didn't put these people in their eyes at all, allowing them to grow, and then cruelly suppressing them at a certain time. It was like wheat in the field, but it was not time to harvest. When the nobles saw their colleagues being hanged, their gazes were no different from looking at wheat that had been cut down. It was the same understatement, and there was even a tinge of appreciation in their gazes. It was such a gaze that deeply hurt him. The bishop looked at the direction of the square one last time. He saw a pool of blood gathering in the center of the square. It was so viscous that it looked like a mirror. Many crimson, twisted monsters with wings were struggling in the pool. Thick blood covered their bodies and connected them to the blood pool. They looked like embryos in the womb. They were so ugly that it was nauseating. He knew that the son of the evil god had arrived. The disciples of the Black Flame and the tree herders were everywhere in Wonde. They worshipped the power of distortion. It was not chaos or the demons, but the evil god. The question of whether the evil god was a god or not had been debated by scholars for thousands of years. However, these horrible and ugly existences were indeed part of the gods. They were born from the blood of the gods. No one knew who created them, or what kind of intentions they had. However, since the day these horrible and twisted monsters were born, it was as if they were cursed by all the malice and hatred in the world. They were crazy and irrational. They worshipped killing and cold death. They were powerful and strange. It was as if their mere existence made the world uneasy. Because of this, when the evil god was born, they were deeply sealed by the gods. Only a few of their descendants were left behind on the earth. They were called the oracles. The most famous of these was the evil god born from the blood of the gods, the demon tree Fenlidos. Its descendants, the golden demon tree, were deliberately cultivated by the tree herders. They were spread all over the world. That was how the name of the tree herders came about. The followers of the tree herders, the disciples of the Black Flame, worshipped the power of these strange creatures. However, for a long time, they were still very far away from obtaining this power. The weak oracles seemed to be the limit of the power of mortals. Since the War of the Holy Saints, no one had ever been so close to a true god. Even if it was an evil god. The debate among the scholars seemed to have come to an end in the capital of the Cruz people, Rusta. He pulled down his cloak again and muttered to himself nervously. "Beg for mercy, but I won't give you a chance." There was nothing more delightful than watching an enemy that was once so powerful that it was terrifying groaning in front of him. He wanted to see what kind of expression those insufferably arrogant fellows in the inner city would have when they were about to die. He casually turned his head and said to the people around him, "Have the people we sent to the Cat and Beard and returned?" The young disciples asked each other this question and soon received a negative answer. This answer made the bishop frown. It was as if they were so powerful that even the empire had to kneel down in front of him. How could they make things difficult for him over such a small matter? This made him very unhappy. What, there's no news at all? His tone became disdainful, containing a strong sense of dissatisfaction. The disciples shook their heads again. The city is in a mess now. Maybe they met with trouble on their way back. Someone in the crowd gave a reasonable explanation. The bishop thought for a moment and agreed with this explanation. In his opinion, the Dragon Queen's plan had no possibility of failure. He had carefully investigated the people in the inn and knew that the fiancé of the small noble was not capable at all. Of course, the unexpected factor of the white fog was not within his consideration. He decided to put this problem aside and said, "The ceremony in the city must be accelerated. The main ceremony is almost finished. There are dozens of ceremonies big and small. Could it be that those idiots can't even finish 1/3 of the ceremony in the time I set?" The young disciples looked at each other and did not know why the usually easygoing bishop suddenly became so angry. But these people were not idiots. Soon, someone suggested, "Maybe we can contact them." The bishop thought for a moment and nodded. They rarely contacted each other in private because they were afraid of being discovered by the ubiquitous witches. But tonight, there was no such worry. At this time, the self-righteous Her Majesty Queen could not even take care of herself. The young disciples immediately took out a communication crystal and carefully connected it. Then, they respectfully handed it to the bishop. "Whose crystal is this?" The bishop turned around and asked. The light of the torch cast a thick shadow of the hood on his face. It was as if there was a deep scar hidden under every wrinkle. "It seems to be Dennis's. That's the ceremony on Ninth Street." The bishop held the crystal in his hand and asked calmly, "Is it Dennis? Please reply if you hear me." The crystal was silent for a moment. Then, it lit up slightly, and a voice came from above. "I hear you, but I'm not Dennis." The bishop was almost stunned for a moment. Everyone present was also silent for a moment. Then, the bishop said in exasperation, "I don't care who you are. Get Dennis to talk to me immediately." "I'm afraid that's a little difficult." The voice from the crystal replied with some difficulty. "What's so difficult about that? Where is he?" The sound of rummaging came from the crystal. Then, the voice replied, "It's like this. I don't know that the corpse at my feet is the person you're talking about. Why don't I send them over and you can identify them one by one?" The bishop held the communication crystal in his hand. It was so quiet that you could hear a pin drop. Who are you?" "Oh, right, I forgot to introduce myself." The voice from the crystal replied, "My name is Brando. I don't care if you know me or not, but you'd better wash your neck and wait for me to kill you." Thud. The crystal fell to the ground. As everyone looked at each other, the bishop could only feel a ball of anger quickly gathering in his chest and burning fiercely. It felt as if he had just obtained unparalleled power. Even the powerful empire did not dare to touch his edge and had to bow before him, but a group of clowns just had to jump out to test his strength. He did not care about the other party's name at all. He only subconsciously thought that they were just a group of crazy nobles who wanted to prove themselves in front of Her Majesty the Queen. He could not help but laugh in anger. These people really want to be famous. Fine, I'll wash my neck and see how they're going to kill me. But unfortunately, this group of crazy people only seemed to treat it as a joke and did not really intend to kill him. But what they did next made the bishop feel even worse than if he were killed. Under everyone's gaze, in less than a quarter of an hour, the communication crystals on the ground lit up one after another. And every time it lit up, there was an unfamiliar voice announcing himself. Then, he told them, "Honorable sir, your subordinate unfortunately died in my hands. But I promise you, there will definitely be a next time." The bishop's face went from red with anger to green with anger. But after a few times, the faces of the people present began to show signs of turning from black to white. This was because they realized that in less than half an hour, more than 7 ritual grounds were attacked. From the reaction of the crystal, there were no survivors. It was only now that the bishop realized that the other party was not some crazy young man. This was definitely a revenge organized by some party after they reacted. Unfortunately, this revenge was so swift and heavy that it almost made him tremble. He could not help but tremble a little as he asked, "How many people did we lose?" In fact, he was more concerned about how many ritual grounds were still in operation. For a moment, he almost thought that the organization's meticulous plan had failed in his hands. Chapter 1089. Plop. Plop. Brando frowned as he walked through a thin layer of sticky blood. Every time he lifted his foot, his boots would leave long streaks of blood behind. It was nauseating. What was even more unpleasant was that he could not find a place to walk. The room was filled with corpses. They could still save a lot of people at the previous ritual sites, but here, there were only lifeless corpses. Wretch, the young man named Alcra was retching on the altar, but he could not vomit anything. Whatever he wanted to vomit, he had already vomited out. The Shire floated back from the distance, hovering about a foot above the ground. He had no choice but to waste his magic in such a place. Otherwise, he would not be able to walk as fast as Brando. Not a single one of them is breathing. These people are simply professional killers. Even the butcher knows to pray to Mother Marcia before he kills them. He shook his head as he spoke. He had a new understanding of these cultists. Actually, most of them died from excessive blood loss. Medisha added, "I've checked their wounds. Many of them did not die immediately after being cut. This ritual must have extracted their blood." Brando stopped and looked at the pool of blood in front of him. It was as calm as a mirror. It was not a pool, but more like a drop of blood with a diameter of 10 meters. The tension on the surface kept it at a height of 30 to 40 centimeters. Blood itself did not have such tension. As soon as Brando approached, the surging magic in his eyes converged. The pool of blood that was calm on the surface gushed out without warning. A twisted monster jumped out from it, screaming and pouncing on Brando with sticky blood all over its body. Brendel took a step back, and the flaming blade in his hand flicked upwards. Countless metal shards that were fixed in the void pierced through the monster's chest without any resistance, like a hot knife piercing through butter. The flesh on both sides of the blade seemed to have encountered a high temperature of several thousand degrees, emitting flames and bubbling blood as it melted. Pus and blood flowed down from the open wound. The monster let out a shrill scream, but Brando raised his left hand and an invisible wave swept across. The shrill scream came to an abrupt end. The nobles stood far away from the house, but Chancellor Nydivan and his eldest son followed in and witnessed the scene with their own eyes. They saw the terrifying monster's head twist and then disappear as if it was swallowed by a distorted space. The body that lost its head twitched, and an arrow of blood shot into the sky. However, it did not touch Brando at all. Before it could get within a few feet of the young lord, it was pushed away by an invisible force. Plop. The monster's body fell back into the blood pool. Brando glanced at the blood pool. The space on his left suddenly cracked open. He reached out, and a bottle of high-grade holy water flew out of the dimensional space and landed in his hand. Just as Nydivan recognized what it was, he saw Brendel open the bottle and pour the entire bottle of holy water into the blood pool. "Don't." The young chancellor looked pained. Just as he was about to say that it was too wasteful, the blood pool that had been filled with holy water suddenly churned as if it was alive. It let out a deafening scream. Then, countless bubbles emerged from the blood pool, and clouds of red mist that represented high temperature rose into the air. Such a violent reaction left all the nobles speechless, including little Nydivan. His scream lasted for almost 15 minutes before it gradually subsided. When the thick red mist in the room dispersed, everyone was surprised to find that the place where the blood pool used to be was now empty. There was only a lump of dark, dried blood on the ground, and in the center of the blood scab, there were only a few blood-red crystal-like objects that emitted a demonic light scattered around. Brando waved his hand, and those crystals flew into his hand out of thin air. "What on earth is that?" Little Nydivan finally reacted, and asked with a pale face. Brando frowned and did not say anything. The monster from before should be an oracle. It emitted a thick scent of top-grade divine blood. It should be the divine blood of the dragon of fanaticism, Alphonse. Brendel had never seen an oracle infected by divine blood in the game, but players had their own way of judging. This angel was still in its infancy, but its strength was already on par with the adult Earth Angel he encountered in Chablis. He couldn't help but wonder where the disciples of the Black Flame sect found this thing. In the past, the most common ones were the 4 elemental gods' blood oracles, followed by the dark gods' blood oracles and the thunder gods' blood oracles. Of course, this was excluding the disciples of the demon tree Fenlidos. The golden demon tree had almost become a newbie killer in the game. He turned to the young man not far away and asked, "Alcra, do you know what the disciples of the conclave are summoning?" Alcra's face was pale. He saw the dried blood pool and his stomach churned again. Fortunately, he had already vomited everything he could, so he only felt like his stomach was being scraped. After vomiting some jaundiced water, he answered, "My lord, the disciples of the conclave claim that they will summon the Archangel Eroma to end the rule of the Empire." "Nonsense," Nydivan interrupted, "look at this. Only fools would believe their nonsense. They should be summoning the evil god Frederick." Old Nydivan suddenly spoke. The evil god Frederick. There were at least 800 evil gods in Wonde, and not every type of divine blood corresponded to an evil god. There were many failed experiments by the divine folk, and the players might not be able to recognize all of them. The old chancellor nodded. This is related to the origin of the Lust Tower. During the Twilight War, the Archangel Eroma with the sacred sword slew the evil god Frederick here. Later, the Flame King Gretel found the Archangel's shield here and used it to build the Lust Tower. So this is not only the place where Eroma sacrificed herself, but also the place where the evil god Frederick fell. Brando understood. So they are using Eroma's name to resurrect the evil god. How powerful is this evil god? Just as there were many types of evil gods, their strength was often uneven. Powerful evil gods such as the evil god Samari made with the blood of the thunder god and the demon tree Fenlidos made with the blood of Gaia were rumored to have strength close to that of a god. Although they were not as powerful as the 7 dragons or the Lord of Elements, they were close to a demigod like the god of giants, Milos. Brando knew very well what kind of strength Milos had. Back in the deadly tundra, a remnant demigods will almost destroyed the world. It was easy to imagine what kind of strength Milos had in his complete form. As for the weaker ones among the evil gods, it was hard to say. For example, the evil god Frederick could actually be killed by a holy angel. Although the holy sword Eroma was a holy seed of the holy cathedral of fire, her strength wouldn't exceed the silver body. Of course, this was a real silver body, and it was different from the silver body forged by the players with the war slate. Old Prime Minister Nydivan did not know that Brando had already classified the evil god Frederick as a weakling in his mind, but the natives' understanding of power was obviously not the same as the players' understanding of power in the later stages of the game. He was silent for a moment before replying, "No matter what, at least he has crossed the step of the sage. This is no longer something that you and I can understand. If they can really revive Frederick in his complete form, the Empire will probably suffer an unprecedented calamity. Brando was thinking, what is there not to know about those above the Sage Realm? But after a moment, he reacted. From the old Prime Minister's point of view, this seemed to be true. What kind of concept was it to cross the Sage Realm? The proud Silver Folk, the sorcerer kingdom that dominated everything above the floating clouds. Among the dozens of sorcerer leaders in the past 1,000 years, only William and Solomon were rumored to have crossed the line between man and God. But in reality, William was only at the peak of the Sage Realm in this era. Moreover, the arrival of the Great Demonic Wave had a greater impact on the lower levels, and the impact on the upper levels was negligible. So, even after the Year of Sparks, William was still unable to cross the line between man and God. Solomon, on the other hand, did indeed have the strength of a silver body. The god of mages was not a rumor, or else he would not have been able to dominate the Silver Alliance for thousands of years. As for the more powerful giant dragons, only 2 of them had crossed the line between man and God in thousands of years. They were Woned and Tauskratz. The former was known as Woned, who was close to becoming a god, and was seen as the successor of the next dragon god. Once her golden body broke through to the power of existence, she would be the first new god after the departure of the god of Woned. The latter was the hero of both giant dragons and humans, the sky dragon Tauskratz. This title explained everything. His golden body was slightly weaker than Woned's, but it was still at the level of a demigod. These 2 dragons were the only 2 demigod dragons left in the entire giant dragon race. Therefore, once one crossed the Sage Realm, it would be after the Holy Realm. Regardless of whether one had a bronze body or a golden body, they were all at the level of a Holy Realm. The only difference was whether one had the power of a normal Holy Realm or the power of a demigod. This was the reason why the evil gods were called gods. For mortals, even people like old Nydivan, who stood at the peak of mortal power, had to look up to the realm of gods. Therefore, for this old man, it was not surprising that he had such an understanding. However, for Brando, in the post-war era of the War of the Slate, most players had entered the early stage of the bronze body. This was the limit that the Iron Folk could reach, and their strength was roughly equivalent to that of a weaker divine servant. However, the players, or rather, the game version, took a different approach and used the war slate to simulate the power of the superior laws, allowing players to awaken the silver body. This silver body was still a distance away from the real silver holy realm, but it could still reach the level of the bronze body middle stage, and it could also gain some abilities that the bronze body middle stage did not have. For example, Brando was immune to all dark energy and negative corrosion. This was something that the bronze body middle stage did not have. With this experience, players had killed real demigods more than once, such as in the war against Akis. Therefore, they were not afraid of the so-called demigods, let alone the evil god Frederick. However, Brando also knew that if the disciples of the Black Flames really resurrected the evil god Frederick in this era, it would be a big problem. Fortunately, this was the Empire. Brando thought for a moment and replied, "We've destroyed a lot of ritual places along the way, so we should be able to disrupt the arrangements of the disciples of the secret society. But I can see that such places are scattered all over the Lushta Star, and we can't spare the effort to uproot them one by one. This is just a small lesson. I have plenty of time to settle the score with the tree herders. Our main goal now is to head to the White Rose Garden." Old Nydivan nodded. He knew very well that Brando only attacked the cultists for revenge, and there was no reason for him to help the Silver Queen solve her current problem. After spending some time together, he more or less understood the temperament of this Count from Erewhon. He did not have any objections to this. The old Prime Minister had been able to stand tall in the eye of the storm precisely because he knew when to stand firm and when to compromise and give in. If the disciples of the secret society can summon the evil god, why didn't the Empire summon the Archangel Eroma to deal with them? Alcra suddenly asked. It's not that simple. Young Nidevan shook his head. The cultists chose to use sacrifice to resurrect Frederick. Who knows how many people would be sacrificed? Which royal family on the continent would dare to do that? Besides, even if they used other methods, they would need a saint's relic. I wonder where the tree herders found the remains of the evil god Frederick, a saint's relic. Although the young man was smarter than most people, his knowledge was still limited. He asked in confusion, what about Lady Aroma's shield? Isn't that angel's shield erected in the Victory Square? And I heard that the angel's sacred remains have always been protecting the empire beneath the imperial capital, although that shield was found by Lord Flame King, it's actually just a symbolic thing. The current prime minister shook his head. To Lady Aroma, her most important weapon is her sword. That's why she's called the angel with the sacred sword. As for the sacred remains, it's actually just an incomplete phalanx. It's even less useful. Archangel Aroma. Brando suddenly thought of something and asked, Archangel Aroma. Is that the angel with the sacred sword, the golden flame angel Aroma? Chapter 1090. That's right. A voice came from inside the room. Sydney and Veronica walked out of another room with a straight face. From her face, it was obvious that the situation there was just as bad as here. Ko Hua walked out of the room on the left. This building was a small temple. It originally belonged to a god in the art field, but after the gods left for thousands of years, it had become a public gathering place. Everyone was in the main hall of the temple, and there were two smaller ceremonies going on at the same time in the side halls on the left and right. There were also dead people on the ground. They are simply lawless. Veronica's gloomy face was even worse than the statue of the Lion Palace's saintess. The latter was a cleric, while she was a soldier. Soldiers could not tolerate some sneaky people acting unscrupulously on the land of the empire. However, this did not affect Ko Hua's mood. The she-wolf still looked indifferent, as if she had nothing to do with it. Evil gods and dusk species were the enemies of mankind, but the two had nothing to do with each other. The pride of the pure-blooded dusk species was no less than that of the gods, so she had reason to look down on these defective products. The three Valkyries followed behind her. These tall, heroic female Valkyries who were burning with pale white flames would always attract a lot of attention. The nobles all looked over, and the latter did not look away, showing the true temperament of a soldier. At this time, Brando did not care about hiding anything and showed all his forces. He was so powerful that even the former prime minister of the empire had to look up to him. How could this be the level of a noble in a remote area? Even the great noble families in the heart of the empire might not be at this level. After Brando received a positive answer, a trace of emotion appeared on his face. The Flame King found Aroma's shield. You even found its sacred remains. Veronica looked at the young man with some curiosity and replied, Little guy, what's so strange about this? Rushdie itself is a relic of a saint. This city is under the protection of the Angel of Aroma. Its outer walls are enchanted with powerful holy spells that can withstand any level of magic or physical attacks on the continent without leaving any traces. This city wall is known as the Invincible White Wall. Today, the scale of Lushta has expanded by several times and several districts have been built outside the outer wall. However, the outer wall of the city has never been rebuilt because of this reason. As she spoke, her voice involuntarily became softer. No matter how strong the fortress was, it would be breached from the inside. From the looks of it, this 1,000-year-old capital was facing the same predicament. Brendel did not mind her slightly hurt pride. He knew that Lust Tower was a holy relic, but he thought it was a relic left behind by the Flame King Gretel. He did not expect this to be the case. Alcra, you said that Aroma's shield was erected in the Victory Square. Then where is the holy skeleton? It is said that it was buried under the statue of Iroma, my lord. Aren't they afraid that someone will steal it? Who dares? Besides, ordinary people can't even get close to Iroma's statue. It's protected by the gods. Very well. Everyone present suddenly felt a surge of confidence from the young Count Erwin. He looked up and looked around. Let's go to the Victory Square. Little Nidivin was stunned. Wait, there are Imperial Guards stationed there. His voice weakened again, and it's not in the direct line to the Rose Garden. It's fine. Brando replied nonchalantly, sharpening the axe will not delay the work of cutting wood. Sharpening the axe will not delay the work of cutting wood. The old Prime Minister narrowed his eyes, as if trying to figure out what Brendel's intentions were. He asked with some praise, where did this proverb come from? It's quite concise and simple. Brando usually smiled at such questions without answering. Besides, those around him were already used to his strange but not unreasonable words. Andrique's lips moved in disdain. She wanted to say that it was a slang from his hometown. As for where his hometown was, it was far away. Anyway, it was not in Bucci. Brando turned to Alcra and said, Alcra, I'm going to use your secret passage. Lead the way, we'll go to the Victory Square. As you wish, my lord. The young man seemed to be used to Brando's way of doing things and did not question him. Very well. Brando looked at him and said, if there's a chance, I'm willing to bring you back to my territory. Alcra's face was filled with joy. Brando's words meant that he wanted him to become a servant. A servant of a noble was also half a noble. If he made a contribution, it would be easy for him to be recommended into the world of nobles. While he was just a commoner, the gap between the two identities had been removed with a single sentence from Brendel. Although it was not completely removed, at least there was hope for him to move forward. He had learned some relevant knowledge from a priest, and was very different from the muddle-headed youths in the countryside. Because of that, he was more ambitious. However, the identity of a commoner often made him feel uncomfortable and painful. As the son of a farmer, even if he joined the army, it would be difficult for him to obtain military merits. This was because only knights could perform meritorious deeds, and knights were also nobles. In the army, commoners were often regarded as the followers of knights, and their meritorious deeds should undoubtedly belong to the knights. This was also the biggest threshold between the two classes. He almost subconsciously wanted to agree, but at the last moment, he held himself back and said, My lord, but Seti, you can bring her with you. If she's willing, you can also bring your family, her father, and other family members. Brando nodded. This was a generous offer for any noble. Even the other nobles could not help but look at Brando and the commoner. They wanted to know what was so special about the latter that the Count of Erewhon was willing to raise so many mouths to feed. However, Brando really admired the young man. He was smart, came from a humble background, and was able to seize the opportunity. He was willing to give the latter a chance, but in fact, the latter's loyalty at the last moment was the reason why Brando gave him such a generous offer. As for Alcra, he was already moved to tears. The nobles of Cruz expressed that they did not understand. Only Corfez stood by the side, watching the scene from afar. When Brendel turned his gaze to her, he thought for a moment and said to her, Can you stay in the outer city? Aren't you afraid that I'll run away? Your sister. The little she-wolf clenched her teeth, but quickly calmed down. She looked at him with a gaze that seemed to see through him and said, You won't kill her. You won't even lay a finger on her. My sister is kind and innocent. How can you blame her for my mistake? Then she said word by word, Brando, you are a good person. You can't fool me. Brando thought that Ko Hua was kind, but not pure. The little girl was not as ignorant as she appeared to be. Her brain was not inferior to Delphine's at all. In fact, he knew that as a twin, Black Ko Hua was the same. It was just that she was not willing to help. The little she-wolf's words were directly sent to his mind with her psychic ability. Brando found that he could not send the message back. He did not know how the other party broke the psychic interference of the horseshoe insect. Perhaps this level of trick was not worth mentioning in the eyes of such a pure-blooded dusk species. He could only say, "This is for you." Then he threw the blood-red crystal in his hand to her. The little she-wolf didn't care at first. She casually took the crystals, but her expression immediately changed. "This is pure dark magic. Oh my God, there's also some divine power in it. This is good stuff. You're actually willing to give it to me?" She raised her head and looked at Brando with narrowed eyes. "I see. I understand now. You humans are ridiculous. If we can obtain great power, we can easily devour our own kind. You actually gave up the power at your fingertips for these pedantic reasons. This is the difference between humans and beasts." Brando answered coldly. He gave the little she-wolf a solid blood crystal. It was similar to a magic crystal, but the blood crystal contained the blood of God. It was not comparable to a magic crystal left behind by a demon. This thing was very useful to him. In layman's terms, each blood crystal was equivalent to about 500,000 experience points and 10 points of all attributes. Although the effect would be greatly reduced after absorbing too much, the few blood crystals in his hand could almost increase his strength by 1/10. But just as the little she-wolf had said, these blood crystals were not condensed from the pure magic of the blood rain of God. These two things were not that powerful. In fact, they were the product of sacrificing countless lives to obtain them. Demons loved these things the most, and so did the dusk species. But he could not accept it. But it was a pity to waste it. After all, the dead would not be resurrected. It was just right to give it to the little she-wolf. "Cut the crap," he said. "Stay in the outer city and cause trouble for the cultists. You are doing Her Majesty a favor by destroying their ritual." Ko Hua did not object and accepted his bribe. "I don't think you can completely destroy the tree herder's ritual." Brando did not care. He left Ko Hua in the outer city only to slow down the cultists and continue to teach those clowns who provoked him a lesson. If it was before, he would certainly hope that the cultists could cause trouble for the Silver Queen. But now, he did not want the cultists to invade the inner city and cause trouble for him. Delay them for 2 hours. "I can't do that. I'm not stronger than you now." "Then 1 hour it is." "Deal." At this moment, the inner city was in a state of chaos. Not all nobles had the right to be invited to Her Majesty's banquet. The middle and lower nobles who lived in the inner city could not enjoy the singing and dancing in the Garden of White Roses. They could only watch the flames in the outer city in fear, hoping that the tragedy would not repeat itself. In the turmoil decades ago, although the mobs did not invade the inner city, the nobles, especially the middle and lower nobles, had a hard time during the week of siege. In order to protect themselves, they had to spontaneously organize to guard the city walls. It was inevitable that they would lose their property. More unfortunately, some nobles died because of it. Death was a distant and terrifying word for the nobles in the imperial capital. It was second only to being stripped of their noble status and becoming a commoner. As for the nobles in the imperial capital, there were even fewer older nobles who had experienced the turmoil back then. The younger nobles tossed and turned in bed throughout the night. After all, who knew if the rioters would suddenly appear before them? In a sense, their worries were not unreasonable. At this moment, the inner city's gates, walls, and fortresses had been reinforced by the imperial guards. Some of the Knights of the Flame family had also participated in the defense work. But the situation was not as optimistic as imagined. Cassette was such a Knight of the Flame family. As a Knight of the Flame family, every one of them was a high-ranking member of the Holy Sanctum. At the same time, he was also an elite among the nobles of the Empire. His title was a Viscount, and he was born in a branch of the Khanna family. This family belonged to the Cecil family. It could be said that he was a member of the Holy Sanctum faction. His status was extremely high. As soon as he arrived at the city wall, he took over the defense work of this section of the city gate. He was fully deserving of the title of the highest-ranking officer. The original commander, a knight captain of the city guards, did not even dare to breathe loudly in front of him. This was a knight of the Flame family, a godlike figure in the eyes of the Empire. But Cassette's expression was not much better than the knight captain's. Before he arrived, the mobs led by the cultists had launched 3 attacks on the city. Other than leaving a mess of corpses, they did not cause any damage. Although the inner city walls of Rushta did not have the effect of the angel's protection, it was not something that a group of mobs could take down with their bare hands. But this was not good news. As an experienced knight of the Holy Sanctum, Cassette had already seen that these cultists were deliberately wasting lives. Morale was meaningless to fanatics, but death was very meaningful to the cultists. The cultists were the disciples of the Black Flames, and not the All-for-One or the Sheephead cult. Cassette's rich experience in fighting enemies allowed him to make a judgment immediately. Moreover, during the 3rd attack, he had already seen the oracles mixed in the crowd and killed one with his own hands. If he had not acted quickly, there would have been casualties on the city wall. The oracles were at least elemental realm. And he could see that the one he killed was just a newborn. He could not help but wonder where the disciples of the Black Flames found such pure blood of God. The strength of the oracles did not depend on the strength of the blood of God they belonged to. For example, the evil god Frederick could also have powerful oracles because the blood of God that created them was very pure. It could also be said that the blood of God contained a very high amount of blood of God. Because of this, Cassette was keenly aware of the danger. Although Her Majesty had been cautious enough to invest enough defensive forces, it was still not enough. The situation was somewhat unexpected. He did not quite understand why Her Majesty would leave the mobs alone, nor did he understand that the so-called banquet was so important. It was worth giving an order for the Flame family knight to firmly guard the inner city before the banquet ended. They were not allowed to let a single mob enter, but they were also not allowed to launch a counterattack. At first, he thought that it was a little ridiculous. Killing these rioters was the right thing to do. But now, it seemed that he was thinking too much. If the previous siege came a few more times, he wouldn't be able to guarantee the safety of the people on the city walls. We have to inform Her Majesty. He turned back and said to his deputy. Chapter 1091. Soft claws slowly fell on the stone floor, the pads of flesh under the soles of her feet were squeezed out of shape. Then, her 4 sharp nails lightly tapped the ground one after another, her silver fur spread out in the opposite direction of her muscles. A silver beast gracefully stepped out from the darkness. Darkness Ko-Hua lightly propped herself up and jumped down from its back. Her long black hair fluttered in the wind like silk. She turned back to look at the small holy church that was obscured in the darkness. This is truly the most interesting human I've ever seen. Unfortunately, his understanding of our world is still too little. He didn't understand that the moment had already arrived, and he still fell for it. He's a good person, the silver wolf actually spoke. The girl's voice was like a string of silver bells falling on the ground, tinkling loudly. Perhaps, but this era doesn't matter if it's good or bad, sister, the wolf shook her head. Can't we just stay away from the war and ignore the affairs of the world? Do you still remember what we promised Lord Milos? Darkness Ko-Hua reached out her hand and lightly stroked the wolf's cheek, staring straight into her green eyes that were filled with compassion. But this isn't up to us to choose, it's back, my dear sister, listen. The wolf remained silent, her green eyes were as calm as ice. Darkness Ko-Hua closed her eyes and answered. The long sound of a horn resounded between the dark clouds, the darkness surged and spread, blocking out the moonlight. They howled, they ran, they came to this world, the girl's voice was so gentle and melodious, like a poem and song that bloomed in a dark and deep world. But the scene it described was so chilling, dark and cruel, despairing and bleak, like the howling wind from the north that froze everything in the world. Two disciples of the secret society wearing black robes walked out from around the corner, surprised to see the strange combination of a wolf and a girl. They couldn't help but stop and look at them. The girl opened her eyes. She was smiling, her clear eyes were filled with the color of knowing everything. "Very well," she spoke, "seeing how he took care of you, and for the sake of these blood crystals, I'll help him one last time, let the mortals see how dusk descends." The two secret society cultists, who were at a loss, finally reacted. They looked at each other warily and drew their shining long swords from under their robes. "Who is it?" Dark Kohua completely ignored them, as if there was only dust in front of him. She quietly took a step forward and craned her neck slightly. Her eyes reflected the brilliance of the silver moon, as if she saw the longing and piety of her hometown. Her bare feet were on the ground, and her 5 fingers were tightly clasped together. Not a speck of dust could be seen on them. She opened her mouth slightly, revealing her sharp white fangs. At this moment, time seemed to have stopped. The eyes of the two secret society cultists clearly reflected an elegant creature howling at the moon. Meanwhile, the girl had already raised her head and let out a wild cry from the depths of her heart. Woo woo woo, woo woo woo, a drop of water fell from the flow of time, passing through the long river of fate, breaking through the shackles of the laws and landing on the surface of this world. Amidst the ruins of the Queen's district, a humanoid insect covered in armor suddenly stopped. It turned its head and looked at the sky with complicated compound eyes. The dark clouds were churning, a black veil passed through the flawless moonlight, piece by piece. The gigantic silver moon was losing a corner, then degenerating into a string, then half of it, then a string, until only a broken hook was left, until it was swallowed by the darkness. In the dark night sky, only a circle of silver thread was left. A low whimper echoed in the sky, like the sound of a horn, resounding for thousands of miles. It was low and heavy, sweeping across the land. The sound gradually became one, forming rolling thunder, as if countless evil spirits were galloping above the dark clouds. Woo woo woo, thousands of years later, people once again saw the scene of a pack of wolves galloping in the sky. The two secret society cultists were stunned. They looked around, not knowing what to do. They had declared that they would destroy this decaying world, but when the apocalypse truly arrived, there was no joy in their hearts. Only despair rose in their hearts, and their eyes were filled with darkness. The galloping black fog passed through their bodies. With a crack, the two of them were lifted up unnaturally, as if they were picked up by a giant beast. Their bodies were snapped in half, as if countless sharp teeth had torn their flesh apart, throwing them high up into the sky. Blood rained down like rain. The pitch-black giant wolves were galloping in the fog. Sometimes they turned into solid form, sometimes they turned into mist. Woo woo woo, woo woo woo. From all directions, countless voices echoed the long howls of the young girl Kohua. They were wolves, walking before the dusk of the wound. Between the mountains and forests of the loop of trade winds, there was an ancient dreamland. It turned into an invisible force and walked on the mountains and forests, recalling and repeating the past. It was like an ancient will that was immersed in the bizarre past. Above the misty forest, the ancestral divine beast weaved by the fog slowly stopped. Its 12 heads above the clouds turned around and looked at this familiar land. Thousands of years. Thousands of years. It remembered a group of elves passing by here. It met a strange wizard. It met a knight who dared to bargain with it. There was also a sneaky fellow, a little fellow that it did not care about, a woman and another woman. Many memories of the past appeared in this dreamland. Then, the giant beast's body began to become illusory, as if the wind was blowing the clouds, and the fog was dispersing. The 12 heads of the ancestral god beast gradually faded above the clouds, and finally turned into a few wisps of smoke, lying across the sky. That invisible and majestic power. It completely disappeared from the misty forest. Dong, far away from the Black Forest, in the Abyss territory, all the Senia people felt their hearts thump heavily, as if something important was happening. Countless people woke up from their dreams. They put on their clothes and rushed out, only to see the girl who usually taught them and acted as the village's healer standing in the middle of the village. Miss Sophie. Everyone, please stop. The girl turned around. Her face under the snow-white hood looked particularly sacred at this moment. Please remember my words, and firmly follow the footsteps of your Lord. Only he can save all of this. She stretched out her hand, and the world of dreams spread out from under her feet. It was an independent world. Its name was Bunasan, the country of the north wind. A great will stopped at the other side of this world. In the misty valley. The heavy fog seemed to be given life and surged. Behind the fog, a huge eyelid was slowly opening, revealing a cold and beautiful pupil. That emerald green penetrated the heart. Martha, a low voice muttered to itself. The mountains rumbled. Above the sea of trees, the elves and druids were shocked to see the weather of the loop of trade winds changing drastically. The ring of clouds disappeared, the mountains of Valhalla collapsed, and a huge beast shook its hair and slowly stood up from the rubble. This elegant creature seemed to have walked down from the legends. It raised its head and howled at the moon. Its 4 feet stepped on the peninsula, its huge body connecting the sky and the earth. She had a name in the most distant legends and myths. The gods called her Akis. After the wolves. The bishop's face had completely changed. The crystal in front of him was turning to dust, which meant that he had lost control of half of Lushta. He thought this was just a small revenge, but in just 10 minutes, his confidence was completely shattered. How did they do it? How did they do it? The disciples were also in a state of chaos and disorder. This was the scene before the end of the world, but how could so many things just happen to coincide together? Bishop, we have to think of a way. What else can we do? What else can we do? The bishop clenched his fists, his nails almost digging into his flesh. He screamed, "There's no other way. We can only speed up the ritual. But then we can't summon the complete form." The people behind him changed their faces. It's too late. The bishop's face was frighteningly pale. This sudden turn of events had completely messed up his plans. He finally figured out who the other party was, but never in his wildest dreams did he expect the revenge of a mere noble from Aween to be so terrifying. He regretted it. If he had known, he would have been more careful. Although the Dragon Queen's orders had to be completed, at least, it could have been more secretive and perfect. However, the only regret in this world was the bitter aftertaste. There was no chance to start over. Even if it's not complete. The bishop clenched his fists and gritted his teeth. It's enough. He stared at the silver line in the dark night sky. It was a spectacular scene formed by 2 moons superimposed on each other, but the first moon was as black as ink, as if it was just a shadow. Dusk, is nothing more than this. This was the plan of the tree herders for thousands of years. They had to succeed. Ever since they broke with the ring of the world, they had been implementing their own ideas. The Truth Theory, the World Tree Organization, the Earth Army, and the Arbiters were all useless. Time and time again, the God's citizens failed. Only they could save everything. Born from withering and ashes, the balance between everything and nature was cruel and fragile. Wasn't this the creed of the Druids? We have to report back to Her Majesty. Cassiter's words stopped abruptly. He saw a silver light that seemed to come from the distant sky. The rioters were pushing and shoving each other back. A blood-red son of the evil god was torn to pieces by the black fog that filled the sky. Within the surging black fog, there were specks of green light that emitted a chilling intent. "That's a wolf," his adjutant said in surprise behind him. "I know." The knight's mood was far worse than before. "Have you read the Pale Poem?" "What? Have you read the Pale Poem?" Cassiter turned around fiercely, grabbed the adjutant's collar, and shouted, "Idiot!" I. The adjutant was obviously scared out of his wits. "That's a wolf, do you know?" The wolf walks before dusk." The knight's eyes were filled with despair. "The dusk dragon is not dead. We're finished." The silver light in his eyes was becoming brighter. The black fog flooded over the refugees' heads like a tide and surged toward the city wall. Countless sharp teeth were hidden in it. When they swept past the soft human bodies, they were like invisible sharp blades, causing waves of blood. Screams rose one after another. The soldiers' faces were pale. This kind of war was beyond their imagination. The knight pushed his adjutant away, and the latter staggered back. He pulled out his long sword, and the sword flashed like a meteor. "Go down, Sir Knight." The adjutant was stunned. "Get out!" Cassiter roared, "This is not a place for you to stay." "But, no buts." The knight patted his chest and replied proudly, "I am Cassiter, Lochier's knight. I am the vanguard of the Flame King, one of the 120 knights. This place should be my burial place, the place where my sword is folded." The ancient words overlapped with each other, as if two voices were echoing on the city wall at the same time. It was the oath of flame. Everyone seemed to see an illusory figure merging into Cassiter's body. It was as if they saw the 120 knights on the White Plains thousands of years ago, swearing to follow the great figure for life. "Go down." Cassiter swung his sword, and a red light screen rose from behind him. The black fog behind him surged, and countless terrifying giant wolves rolled around and gnashed their teeth. The light screen immediately creaked. The knight's face turned pale. "Quick, I can only hold on for a while." The soldiers were already scared to the point that their legs turned to jelly. They cried and rolled down the stairs. Only the adjutant turned around. He was at least a knight. At this moment, the courage in his heart overcame the fear of death. Then he also saw a little silver light. This silver light was no different from the one in the knight's eyes. "Why aren't you leaving?" Cassiter roared. "Sir, that is, Katja," a giant wolf almost the size of a tower bit the light screen behind Cassiter. It opened its dark mouth and bit at the knight's lower body. But before it could close its upper jaw, a silver line had already pierced through the back of its head. The adjutant's mouth was wide open. One man and one horse, the four hooves of the horse soared into the air. The knight held a long spear, like a ray of silver light, and the long shuttle in his hand was straight forward. The black fog scattered in all directions, and his silver hair was like the passing moonlight, fluttering in the air one by one. "1,000 army, one strike." Medisha's voice echoed over the fortress. Chapter 1092. Tap. 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 Rhythmic footsteps could be heard in the empty corridor. The servant bowed respectfully when he saw the person who had appeared from the shadows. "Dragon Queen, you've returned. Her Majesty the Queen wishes to see you." "Oh. Her Majesty is very concerned about the situation outside." "It's terrible outside." Gwendolyn stopped in the middle of the corridor. The lights of the banquet shone on half of her face through the window, making her look like a silhouette. She smiled and replied, "But it's still under control." The servant was stunned. He did not know how to answer the question. He did not dare to raise his head. He was terrified, not knowing why this lady would say so much to him. It was not a good thing to know too much in the palace. However, Gwendolen was not in the mood to find trouble with such a small character. She looked out the window. The rose garden was brightly lit, and the figures of the people were mingling. The nobles were drunk, immersed in the dream of power and material desires. However, the sky was covered in dark clouds. It was as if there were countless evil spirits running through the clouds. In the distance, the outer city was ablaze. The pillars of black smoke outlined the scene before the end of the world. This grotesque scene was like the final carnival. No matter what, it can't be worse than the current era. Dragon Queen. Gwendolen smiled. It's just a joke. She looked out the window. Her gaze fell on the magnificent lunar eclipse. The guests in the courtyard were also looking at this sudden astronomical scene. However, the colors in their eyes were completely different. The Dragon Queen took a light breath and said to the servant, "The moon mask is blocked." The moon that is blocked is the moon of lies, Corfa, the eldest daughter of Hatti. The moon that is blocking her has no name. For thousands of years, the sorcerers have never recorded it. Only the witches have described it in bits and pieces. Thousands of years ago, it did appear. It's the 13th moon, the Black Moon. The servant did not understand. He finally could not help but raise his head and look at the lady. In his impression, this lord was a man of few words and did not like to talk. However, the impression she gave him today was the complete opposite. Gwendolen looked at the servant's stunned face. She could not help but shake her head and sigh. She felt a little lonely. It was such a great moment. But it was destined that no one could share the feelings in her heart. After thousands of years of countless failures, it all came to an end at this moment. History was like a silent book, in which only people could prove that the past was right and wrong. She listened attentively as if she could hear countless whispers in the long river of history. What if I fail? Forgive me for not agreeing with this plan. Sir Commander, it's time to counterattack. You can't kill me. From today onwards, the ring of the world no longer exists. She moved her lips as if she wanted to say something, but no sound came out in the end. 16. The TOWR the lost moon had taken away the light. Brando followed closely behind Medisha and walked out of the black fog. The giant wolves formed by the fog barked violently beside him, opening their sharp teeth and trying to bite off one of his arms. However, before they could get close to Brando, they were shattered by an invisible force and returned to chaos. The Shire, Alcra, Andrique and her brother, the 3 Valkyries, and a group of nobles walked out one after another behind Brando. Cassette, who was kneeling on the ground, looked at them in shock. Finally, his gaze fell on little Nydivan and old Nydivan. He could not help but tremble slightly. Lord Prime Minister. This Lord Prime Minister was naturally for old Nydivan. For anyone in the noble circle, there was no doubt about who was more important between the old Prime Minister from 60 years ago and the young Prime Minister from 60 years later. However, old Nydivan only nodded slightly in respect and did not intend to respond. During his reign, he did not even need to lower his head in front of the Holy See. Brando sized up Cassette's flame knight armor. He stood on the city wall, and the black fog stopped behind him. This miraculous scene made all the Imperial guards on the city wall hold their breaths. I'm Brando. Brando suddenly spoke to Cassette, who was half kneeling on the ground. Brando Cardeloso, grandson of Earth Sword Saint Darius, Earl of the Kingdom of Erewhon, leader of the Envoy Group, student of Grey Sword Saint Mephisto, Lord of Valhalla, and Highland Knight. Go and tell the Silver Queen that I'm here. Cassette was stunned for a moment. Brando did not give him a chance to answer and pushed his hand forward. Under everyone's gaze, all the soldiers on the city wall, including Cassette, instantly appeared in the crowd below the city wall with his adjutant. Spatial element. Someone could not help but exclaim. Brando stood on the city wall and looked down at everyone. Go, you don't need to defend here anymore. Go and tell Her Majesty the Queen that the guest she invited is here. Cassette subconsciously picked up his sword, but before he could stand up, he heard the female elven knight coldly said to him in midair, Mr. Knight, I saved your life. Cassette froze. Brando also shook his head. Are you going to attack Her Majesty's guest? Cassette stared at him. He did not feel that Brendel was a guest invited by Her Majesty the Queen. Perhaps he was an uninvited guest. But he knew how he should answer at this time. I will report to Her Majesty. He waved his hand. The Imperial Guards immediately dispersed. Everything that happened in front of them was too bizarre. It had long exceeded the scope of what they could bear. Besides, even the Royal Knight of Flame had approved of it. What reason did they have to stay? Old Nydeven looked at the dispersing crowd and then looked at the young man beside him. He could not help but shake his head. You are becoming more and more like your grandfather, Count. The Cataloso family is filled with heroes, all of them are heroes. The Duke of Flowerleaf also flattered. He said this because of the terrifying power created by Corfe. To be able to control such a subordinate lord represented infinite value in itself. After saying that, he glanced at his daughter and nodded at her in satisfaction. Vahina was a little flustered for a moment. How could this young lady not see the meaning behind her father's gaze? Brando did not care about these praises. After the guards left, he frowned and looked back at the black fog. He saw more than anyone else. He could clearly see the wolves running in the black fog. They were the sons of Fenrir, one of the most powerful magic wolves he had seen in the loop of trade winds. What he was thinking was, when did Corfe recover to such a level of power, and he had no idea at all. He remembered that according to the latter, she should need hundreds or even thousands of years to recover her power. Wasn't Ekis the same in the game? Is this caused by Miss Ko Hua? The Shire also whispered to him. The young wizard squire stared at the black fog and the eclipse in the sky with a solemn expression. Brando shook his head. Maybe, but we can't care so much now. He beckoned Alcra over. Alcra, can we see the victory square from here? It's right in front. Alcra was still able to keep his mind clear at this time. It showed that this young man was brave and calm. He pointed to the front and replied, Do you see it, my lord? Very good, Brando nodded, bring us there. Your Majesty, the Dragon Queen has returned. The squire hurriedly ran out from the side door and whispered in the Silver Queen's ear. Her Majesty the Queen turned her head and replied indifferently, Yes. Oh. She's not coming to see me. Although she looked calm on the surface, her slightly furrowed brows revealed her thoughts. The Dragon Queen said that it's not appropriate for her to appear in public. The Silver Queen turned around and looked at the banquet that was being held. She nodded and relaxed her brows, agreeing with this point. What's the situation outside? Did she say anything? The squire hesitated and said, The situation outside is not good, Your Majesty. But the Dragon Queen also said that everything is under control. What else did she say? She pondered for a moment and asked with concern. She said, the squire thought for a moment, probably thinking about the meaning of this sentence, everything is going according to plan. The queen heard this and was silent for a moment before she waved her hand. You may leave. The squire quickly bowed and left. The Silver Queen turned around and swept her gaze across the banquet. Since the start of the banquet, the atmosphere was no longer as harmonious as it was at the beginning. The phenomenon in the sky could be seen by anyone. The nobles were also whispering to each other. More people turned their attention to the scene of the lunar eclipse. Her newly conferred title of Countess was the center of attention of the banquet. But she did not care. Her gaze even seemed a little empty when it swept over the heads of the crowd. She looked at everything in front of her with tiredness. Her indifferent eyes were full of disdain for the mortal world. In a situation where the masters showed a lack of interest, only the young people might have the strength to compete for the limelight. In the crowd, Scarlet's face was pale. She gritted her teeth and looked at the tall man in front of her. He did not look like a human at all. Perhaps he was more like some kind of beast. He was much taller than the average person. Even the tallest nobles of Kurlutz were shorter than him by a head or more. The other party looked down at her. His eyes were full of possessiveness. That invasive gaze was unbearable for Scarlet. If it was not for someone blocking in front of her. Prince August looked at the young man in front of him with dissatisfaction. He knew that the other party was a noble of Kurlutz. But when he first saw Scarlet, he knew that this woman must be his fiancée. She was the best mare that the heavens had given him. No one could stop him. As for the disdain from before, it had long disappeared. Even his impression of the Empire had improved. Of course, other than this unpleasant fellow in front of him. Do you know how I dealt with those blind bastards in the Latch of Wa? August revealed his white teeth like a wolf's smile. I would cut off their heads and skin their scalps to make my battle robes. I once had 17 enemies, and now my battle robes are half complete. Henriette, who was blocking in front of Scarlet, chuckled. He pretended that he did not hear the threat and said with disdain, I don't care how many methods the barbarians have to show their ignorance. Every Kurlutz ancestor here had experienced the era of eating raw meat and drinking blood on the Great Plains. Do you think we would be proud of that? He chuckled, but it seems that Prince August really knows how to do that. August's face turned cold. This beast in human form knew that even if there were 10 of him, he would not be a match for the nobles of the Empire. But he had his own methods. He subconsciously placed his hand on his waist. There was a hunting knife there. As a noble of the mountain, he could bring a knife into the rose garden. Her Majesty the Queen had given him permission to bring a knife into the rose garden. But immediately, many people noticed his action. The royal knight from afar immediately drew his sword and rushed over. Conrad was also shocked. He quickly went to pull his comrade back. But Henriette was unmoved. He looked at the other party's action with disdain. You can use your knife here if you dare, barbarian. You are insulting me. August squeezed the words out from between his teeth. You are insulting yourself. The young man retorted, touching a noble woman, this is the manners of a prince. She is my fiancée. Before Her Majesty agrees, she is not. Henriette added. August finally could not take it anymore. He let out a low growl and was about to pounce on Henriette. But at this moment, the crowd let out a low cry and retreated to both sides. They saw a figure suddenly passing through the courtyard. It separated the crowd and came in front of Her Majesty the Queen. It was a knight. He was wearing the royal knight's armor. He half knelt on the ground and shouted to Her Majesty the Queen, who was on the stairs, Your Majesty, the defensive line on the square has been breached, the defensive line has been breached. Who breached it? The crowd was stunned. Some of them started whispering to each other subconsciously. The commotion over there immediately affected the young people over there. Prince August and Henriette slowed down their movements. Her Majesty the Queen replied, Who is it? She already had an answer in her heart. It is. The knight hesitated for a moment. It is the grandson of Lord Darius Cardeloso. Who is Lord Darius Cardeloso? Who is his grandson? The nobles were stunned. As part of the upper circle of nobles in the empire, they were usually very familiar with the names of famous families or people. Even more so, they could recognize the difference between different nobles and families' coats of arms and the difference between them. This was one of the nobles' instincts. It was also an important means and capital for them to communicate with each other. But at this moment, the nobles of the empire were at a loss. The name seemed familiar, but they could not remember it. What made them feel bad was that Her Majesty the Queen obviously knew this person. The situation was a little tricky. While the nobles were deep in thought, the Queen of Silver smiled as if she had a card up her sleeve. She turned her head, and everyone thought that the Queen of Silver was looking at them, but only Scarlet, who was in the crowd, knew that she was looking at her. At that moment, she felt as if she had fallen into an ice cave. Of course, she knew what this meant. But at this moment, the young girl's heart surprisingly calmed down. She subconsciously clenched her fists, as if she had made up her mind. Ovina, I am calling your name. I need your help. I am responding to your call, my master. But have you thought it through? After a moment, a voice responded in her heart. Scarlet replied, I have, Ovina. Then answer me, who are you? Scarlet was silent for a moment. I am a knight of the azure. In her hand, there was a green spear flickering with silver lightning. It was undergoing the transformation between illusion and reality. It had a name. It was called Firmament. Chapter 1093. At that moment, Scarlet's body and mind sank into her inner world, and the noise around her became distant. Everyone around her subconsciously looked in the direction of the Silver Queen, and their mouths opened and closed as if they were discussing something, but she could not hear a single sound. The entire world became incomparably quiet, and all sounds died out. There was only one clear thought that dominated her heart. His lordship is here. I must warn him that this is a trap. The power and influence of the empire that she had witnessed over the past few months was deeply rooted in the girl's heart. The arrogance and coldness of the empire's nobles was like a poisoned blade stuck in her heart, eating away at her courage. Only in the deepest part of her nightmare could she see the ending with her own eyes. She saw Brando die to save her. She saw everything in Valhalla turn to dust. She saw everyone's efforts turn to dust. Everything she was familiar with, the fragile support in her heart, completely collapsed and ceased to exist. No, no. I can change all of this, a voice seemed to echo in her heart, you can. It was Ovina's voice. It was soft and gentle, like a guide, telling her how people told another story thousands of years ago. The knight who slept at the bottom of Lake Elaine was named Azure. Because this is your destiny, and my destiny. You will control it, just like mortals control their own destinies. One day. The two voices overlapped in her heart. She saw a sword, standing at the peak of 1,000 mountains. She saw another knight, pointing at his spear and swearing in the storm. Every word was sonorous, as if carved into metal. It was as if from that moment on, a new era had arrived. The silver folk hid in the mountains, the golden folk no longer coveted the throne, and on the other side of the Great Plains, a group of iron folk walked out of the thorns and ignorance. In the middle of summer that year, stars filled the night sky. The constellation that represented the Dragon of Darkness still dominated the southern half of the sky. To these people, they didn't think too much about it. They just looked out of the plains through the flickering light of the torches. And there was a new world. The year of change. The Flame King Gretel led the humans through the Great Plains and arrived at Osapo. It was as if the long river of history was unstoppable, and the blessings of the gods were ultimately obtained by the mortals. This was the beginning of the mortal world, and also the final words left behind by the gods. The girl softly replied, it's the Azure Knight, Scarlet. At this moment, the girl's heart was filled with resolute emotions. She was willing to sacrifice everything to reverse a certain inevitable outcome. It was as if the entire world had been turned upside down, but it could not compare to a certain thought in her heart at this moment. Golden flames burned in her eyes as her mortal bloodline faded. Her eyes turned pure silver, then gradually turned golden. It was as if the bloodline of the Myrna people had manifested in this young girl who was a child of the mountains. The flames were filled with memories. Time flowed like water, as if it was yesterday. She saw the carved window lattice of Castle Abbe's, and the warm afternoon sun shining through the stained glass and into the room filled with her memories. The girl lay weakly on the bed, holding the golden apple that the adults gave her. The juice of the sacred fruit was like sweet spring water, flowing into her heart. She saw a tall figure standing in front of the bed, telling her solemnly, "One day, Scarlet, you will pursue your own happiness." Such happiness, the mountain girl's eyes were suddenly filled with tears. She finally understood the true meaning of this sentence. So it is to be the master of one's own destiny. Even if it is the most ordinary destiny. But no one can help others make a choice. What is destiny? It is the sword and the fire, the iron and the blood. It is a poem passed down from generation to generation. Life is full of obstacles, but in the end, it is a choice. Once a choice is made, the sword of destiny will return to the hands of mortals. At this moment, Scarlet was holding the sword in her hand. Vaguely, she seemed to see an army of tens of millions charging towards the pitch-black full moon in the sky on strange vehicles. She saw flying dragons, strange construct creatures, valkyries, giants, and all kinds of creatures that only existed in myths and legends. Tens of thousands of them attacked the giant shadow above the clouds. She saw silver-eyed elves with pointed ears, wizards in snow-white robes, humans, dwarves, roaring as they launched a counterattack against the dark army on the horizon. Tens of thousands of soldiers fought against each other. Then, she saw herself. A dark-skinned girl with a long red ponytail, gritted her teeth, and eyes full of unyielding determination, switching between the ages of 14 and 19. This was a girl from the mountains of Chablis. She should have been so inconspicuous, but the coincidence of fate made her stand here at this moment. And at this moment, she wanted to make a decision that she would not regret, just like the sages of the past. Scarlet raised the spear in her hand, and there seemed to be a faint resonance above the clouds. A beam of light immediately pierced through the clouds and went straight down. 4 seals of the azure lance were released in a row. An invisible ripple spread out in all directions, and the banquet was suddenly in chaos. The nobles who had yet to react were pushed to the side by Pymoning's power. The knights were shocked, and they pulled out their swords and rushed over. In the distance, the court wizards were rising into the sky, chanting a long spell. But all of this. At this moment, in Scarlet's eyes, it was like a slow-motion picture. She looked up and roared, and the clouds suddenly flashed, and thunder poured down like a rainstorm. The court knights who were drawing their swords were suddenly thrown out, and the wizards who had just ascended fell one after another like stones. Scarlet's body was surrounded by electric snakes, and the electricity in her eyes was blazing. She was like the legendary god of thunder. She raised her spear again, and a flash of electricity fell from the periphery of the Garden of the White Rose. The royal guards who were rushing in from outside were suddenly overturned. The nobles around her had all retreated. Conrad dragged Henriette, who was at a loss, and rolled under a nearby table. Only the mountain prince, Ogios, who was as strong as a bear, was still standing in front of him. The latter was also shocked. Scarlet did not even think, and pointed her spear at him. A bolt of lightning as thick as a water bucket swept towards Ogios. The Highland prince couldn't react in time. If it weren't for his guards who sacrificed themselves to save him, he would have been beaten to a pulp. But even so, 2 of his guards were still turned into charcoal. But Ogios did not even look at them. At this moment, he only had eyes for Scarlet, and only the spear in her hand with countless exquisite patterns on its surface. It was the carvings of mountains and storms, the earth and the sky. There was only one spear with such patterns on it. It was born between the mountains and storms, and hibernated under the mountains and the earth. The Holy Spear of Heaven. The legendary holy relic of the mountain people. The spear of gods and demons, Gabalug. Ogio's eyes were filled with fanaticism, and he muttered the legendary name of the azure spear and the mountain people. He was almost intoxicated as he reached out to Scarlet. How did you get this? Quick, give me the spear, give it to your man. At this moment, there was only one thought in his mind. In the legend of the mountain people, the one who had the azure spear could rule the world. Yes, he was the destined one. Martha had used this woman to send the spear to him, and from this moment on, he had already regarded Scarlet as his private property. He would become the king of the mountain people, and truly rule the mountains of the Latch of Wa once again. It was not just a small piece of land of the empire, but it was reclaiming its original meaning, the title of owned by the mountain people. This woman was his future queen. And his spear. Few people knew that Ogios was born with the strength of an upper gold, and that he was the chosen one. The mountain people carefully covered up this news, because every chosen one in history would eventually change the world. Just like the Flame King Gretel. Just like Erwin's predecessor, Eric. Or the Earth Sword Saint, Darius. Ogios also believed in this. He was born different, and at this moment, it was proof that fate had crowned him. Not far away, Henriette hid under the table, and Conrad covered his mouth tightly. He stared, almost thinking that the mountain people's prince was crazy. This guy is so arrogant. Although his mind was in a mess, he could not help but wonder, what was Her Majesty doing? Was that the real azure spear? Scarlet frowned. She sensed a threat from the humanoid beast in front of her. She originally thought that the mountain people's prince was an honored guest invited by the Silver Queen, and as long as she threatened this person, she might be able to get the queen to let the feudal lord leave. Over the past few months, she had heard some rumors about the relationship between the mountain people and the empire from the mountain people's maids. She guessed that since the Silver Queen wanted to bribe the mountain people, she would not let anything happen to the mountain people's prince in the Garden of the White Rose. But the truth was a little out of her expectations. She did not expect this guy to be so reckless, and what made her feel even more helpless was that Her Majesty did not seem to see this scene, and did not say a word as she watched coldly from the side. The nobles in the courtyard had already fled, and the knight who got up from the ground immediately protected the Silver Queen, Constance, who was on the main seat of the stairs. The latter only looked at the scene expressionlessly, as if this banquet was not hosted by her, but there was a slightly strange look in her eyes, as if she was thinking about something. The maids next to her trembled, not understanding the situation in front of them. Everything that was happening now was terrible. Not only would Her Majesty lose face, but the prestige of the royal family would also plummet. But what they did not understand was why Her Majesty, who usually paid attention to this, would remain silent at this moment. What made them even more uncomfortable was that if the supreme person of the empire did not say anything, they would not dare to say anything. They could only tremble and wait. On the field, Prince August took a step forward and held out his hand. "Give me your spear." Scarlet frowned. Her stubbornness had obviously angered August. "Damn stupid woman, do you know what you are doing? You dare to attack your future husband, in the Latch of Va. I will throw a shameless woman like you to the lowest of the low. This person is crazy." Henriette, who was lying under the table, had this thought in his mind. Then, he saw Scarlet raising her spear and thrusting it towards the burly prince. She was determined to die, and every time she attacked, she would give it her all. The emerald spear had bright sparks on it, and it struck Ogios's chest. But what everyone did not expect was, August actually reached out and grabbed, like a human tyrannosaurus, he grabbed the azure spear's blade. The sharp spear cut open his palm and pierced half an inch into his chest, and then it could not go any further. Countless electric lights surrounded and jumped on his exposed skin, but the mountain prince looked like nothing had happened, and coldly looked at Scarlet. Whoosh! The Silver Queen stood up from the main seat with bright eyes. Unknowingly, the Dragon Queen Gwendolyn had also quietly stood beside the supreme person of the Empire. The pinnacle of the elemental enlightenment level, not bad for a human of this age. The latter replied. The Silver Queen turned around, her eyes seemed to hide a bright knife, flashing with a terrifying cold light. 30 years ago, my astrologer told me that the chosen one was born in the latch of VA, but then there was no news. It seems that the news that was covered back then was indeed this person. The fact that firmament could hurt him means that the blood of the divine in his body is very thin. Although he is half of Odin's level, he is far from the little girl 60 years ago. The Dragon Queen replied. After all, that was a pure-blooded divine. The Silver Queen moved her lips, but in the end, she did not say anything. What do you plan to do? Gwendolyn looked back at her. All right, let Adatrice and the others enter. The girl can be given to him, but the azure spear cannot fall into his hands for the time being. The Silver Queen replied coldly. What about Darius' grandson? Just a mortal. Since he is here, there is no need for him to leave. After getting this answer, Gwendolyn turned around and silently glanced at the queen, then she turned her head again. There seemed to be no extra expression on her face, but in the vertical prismatic eyes, there was a faint smile. The Silver Queen looked at the messy banquet scene with disgust. It seemed that this private engagement banquet had completely failed, but for the few people present, they had each gotten what they wanted most. As for the uninvited guest, the supreme person of the Empire did not take it to heart. In the Battle of the Frostdew Manor, she had already figured out the other party's bottom line. At this moment, those who were lying in ambush near the White Rose Garden were not just Adatrice and the Witch Queen, but had gathered almost all the top forces that the Empire and the royal family could mobilize at this moment. If the other party did not appear, perhaps they could escape with their lives, but since they were here, there was no more after. As for Darius' grandson, Constance shook her head lightly. Memories of the past, the breeze in the wilderness of the Four Realms, the warm afternoon sun, and even of that face, had long disappeared with the wind. A few witches rose into the sky, and August was smiling wickedly as he reached out his hand toward Scarlet's slender neck. Everything seemed to have a predetermined outcome. But there was an exception to this uninvited voice. The voice was as cold as ice, as if it was narrating a story of heaven and earth. Its owner said indifferently, "If I were you, I would be more careful with my actions. That way, I would not feel so regretful when I go to hell." Ogios was stunned for a moment before he raised his head with a frown. Chapter 1094. Ogios raised his head, his grayish-brown pupils reflecting the long and narrow figure. He saw a young man coming in from the front door of the Garden of White Roses. He did not have an invitation in his hand, only a long sword made of intertwined fragments. The fragments were joined to each other, leaving only a narrow gap between them. The sword emitted a dark red light, and there was a flame emblem on the sword. Few people knew that the emblem was called Flame, which was a golden flame. He held a scabbard in his other hand. It was made of fir wood, wrapped in black horse leather, with a silver buckle and a steel sheath. The scabbard was held in his hand, like a civilized stick. He wore a black woolen earl's coat. The surface was gray, as if it had been weathered for a long time. Even the corners of the coat and the cuffs were worn out, revealing the threads. On the collar was the coat of arms of the Cardoloso family, which was made before he left the Abbes. It was a long sword, inserted in the head of a brown bear, the black pine of Karsuk, the bear of the highlands. There was a black belt, a mithril buckle, 2 rings, and a dial-like ornament on the belt. The hem of the coat covered the breeches that were also worn out in several places. Then there were the long boots, the unique long boots of Granol. The leather was tanned by the best cobblers, waxed, soled, and inlaid with the coat of arms by the most careful shoemakers. It was a specialty of the edge of the Grimoires forest. He walked into the royal courtyard as if there was no one else around. He passed through the night wind of the 1,000-year-old imperial capital and also passed through his coat and hair, fluttering in the wind. The leaves chased after his footsteps and swirled into the garden. This was the last month of midsummer. He walked on the wind, as if bringing with him the bleak feeling of autumn. After this, everything withered. The excellent bloodline of the Cardoloso family did not make Brando handsome or suave, but at least it made him a handsome young man. This was the mark of a knight's family. Coupled with his unique temperament, he was almost unforgettable. Behind him were Medici, the Shire, Mephistopheles, Enrich, and the 3 Valkyries. The nobles of the Cruz family followed behind. As they walked on the white street, they seemed to remember the queen's power. Only old Nidevan and the Grand Duke of Flowers and Leaves could focus. In front of him, hundreds of imperial guards retreated like the tide, as if they had encountered some kind of scourge. However, even if it wasn't, it was more terrifying than a scourge. One only needed to look at the situation in the square outside to understand the reason for everything. The crisscrossing stone slabs on the square that had not been damaged for hundreds of years by magic were plowed into a 5-meter-deep ditch. There used to be a statue of Emperor Grantity there. There used to be a team of palace knights stationed beside the statue. There used to be a tight security line in the square. Now, there was nothing left. Who is he? How did this person get in? The nobles looked at each other. Some of them began to regret attending the banquet. The show that was going to be played tonight was beyond their imagination. Perhaps it had never happened in the palace for hundreds of years. Some of the older nobles compared Brendel's appearance to Brendel's and vaguely felt that the youth looked familiar, but that was a story from decades ago. Even if they thought about it carefully, it was difficult to remember that there was a person from Aween who once dominated the empire. And today, there was going to be a person from Aween who would shake the entire empire. That was exactly what Ogios saw in his eyes. But that was not all. The first thing he noticed was not Brando's body, but the other party's cold gaze. It was as if it was tangible and nailed him to the ground. There was no way he could resist it. It was easy to imagine the shame and anger in the prince's heart. "I've never seen the Lord so angry," Scarlet stared at the tall figure that appeared at the gate. No matter how much she did not want to see the Lord here, at this moment, her heart was full of peace. She loosened her grip and the azure lance fell to the ground with a clang. She suddenly remembered that she had indeed seen the feudal lord show a similar attitude. That was during the first battle in Abes. The lord stared at the ancient castle gate with a cold expression that was not inferior to this moment. At that time, Medici told her that this was for the dead. But she could not understand. Perhaps the dead deserved to be sad, but not angry, because anger was worthless. Because the death of a commoner did not have much value. She was born in the mountains of Chablis and had seen too many deaths. Plagues, accidents, wars, monsters, they could all be the cause of a commoner's death. They would only be buried carelessly. Perhaps some people would be sad, but no one would be angry. Some people just disappeared, but some people could not tolerate it. That was the most special person she had ever seen. A noble who was about the same age as her, but her lord. He killed Grodin. When the sword pierced the baron's chest, she noticed that the lord's face did not have the joy of revenge, only cold contempt. It was as if this was karma, and it should be so. Just for some people he did not know. At this moment, the same contempt appeared on his face. Is it because of me? Scarlet's heart pounded as her mind wandered. Why would the Lord be angry for me? Perhaps this naive girl would never understand this question. Ogios left Scarlet and turned his head to look at Brando coldly. The young man's aura made him feel like he was being provoked. The Silver Queen stopped in front of the main entrance of the White Rose Palace. She turned around and looked at the scene coldly. It was as if she was not the host, and Brando was not a guest. The three of them looked at each other, and the scene became quiet. Junior Nydeven was a little hesitant and wanted to step forward, but his father held him back. The wrinkles on Senior Nydeven's face seemed to have deepened in the cool night breeze. He shook his head gently. I am the great Emperor's Prime Minister, and you are his subject. But you do not know what kind of person our king is. Little Nydeven's face was full of shame. This was the first time his father had said this to him. Old Nydeven pointed at the youth in front of him and replied, Let our count talk to his majesty. Only when his majesty has calmed down will he listen to us. His majesty will be calm. Little Nydeven wondered if his old father's brain wasn't working properly. But old Nydeven shook his head and did not answer. The Duke of Flowers glanced at him and smiled without saying a word. Ogios glared at Brendel like a brown bear and spoke coldly after a long while. After a while, he asked coldly, Who are you? Brando glanced at him, then turned his gaze to the Silver Queen. Ogios looked as if he had been pricked by a needle. His tanned face turned red. In his memory, he was always the one who ignored others. He did not expect to be ignored by a country bumpkin who came out of nowhere. And it was in front of so many people. Henriette, who was lying under the table, saw this scene and was beaming with excitement. He pulled Conrad's hand away from his mouth and gasped, Who is this guy? He has character. I'm telling you seriously, Conrad, I like this guy. When this is over, I must get to know him. Conrad looked troubled. I'm afraid Her Majesty might not think so. Her Majesty the Queen. Henriette snorted. Her Majesty the Queen is the Queen of the Empire, not my queen. I'm a noble of the Empire. Her Majesty has no right to control who I make friends with. If you really want to put it that way, Conrad replied in annoyance, Fine, it's up to you. But subconsciously, he also felt that this guy was indeed out of line. Perhaps it was a little refreshing. He had to admit that he was a little biased towards him. He was a knowledgeable young man, completely different from his companions. He frowned and thought for a moment, then suddenly patted the latter's shoulder. I think I know who he is. Who is that? He has a big background. At this time, the brown bear Ogio seemed to have finally figured out Brando's background. This was all thanks to his follower. The follower trotted all the way to his side and whispered a few words in his ear. The brown bear straightened up and looked at Brando with contempt. Bah, he spat, I thought he was someone, but he's just a country bumpkin. He was completely relieved. He pointed at Scarlet and said to Brando, She's mine now. Erwin Country Bumpkin, you can scram now. Erwin Country Bumpkin. Among the nobles, there were always some who reacted quickly. It's that Cardeloso family. Someone let out a few whispers, and then a name was spread among the nobles. It was made up of only 3 words. But it weighed more than 1,000 pounds. Sword Saint Darius. After 60 years, the grandson of Sword Saint Darius returned to the Empire. The way people looked at Brando changed again. Henriette muttered to himself, So it's him, are you close to him? Conrad asked curiously. He did not know that his companion was related to the legendary Sword Saint of Erewhon. No, it's my grandfather. Henriette bared his teeth. My grandfather had a duel with Sword Saint Darius and lost a mouthful of his teeth. What? Ogios obviously did not hear the whispers of the 2 people under the table. In fact, he also did not hear the whispers of the crowd. He was a noble of the Latch of Wa, but compared to him, the nobles of Erewhon were not even worth mentioning. In his eyes, Brando dared to threaten him, so he was already a dead man. If Brando dared to take a step back, he would press on and leave his head here. In the customs of the mountain people, blood for blood was the only way to repay blood with blood. But he did not expect Brando's response to him to be so simple and direct. The latter turned around, glanced at him, and said, Don't worry. You have a bad memory. Scarlet, who was at the side, realized that her lord was about to attack Ogios. She quickly shouted, "My lord, he has the strength of the elemental enlightenment," but the girl did not say this sentence out loud. Because she saw Brando raise his hand. Prince Ogios, who was 100 meters away from him, flew out as if he had collided with a dragon. He crashed into the buildings on the left side of the White Rose Garden as if this brown bear was not an expert of the elemental enlightenment, but an ordinary person. But obviously, an ordinary person would not be able to break through the walls of a building that had more than 10 floors. Everyone's mouth was wide open. Some of them were still worried for Darius' grandson. Obviously, Prince Ogios was not that popular. But after the previous battle, the nobles more or less knew the strength of the mountain people's prince. The mountain girl defeated dozens of palace knights in one move, but she could not do anything to Ogios. Although the former was not as strong as the Flame family knight, she was at least an upper gold-ranked warrior. The latter's strength was even more obvious. Darius' grandson looked to be in his late teens. How could he be a match for the brown bear in human form? In terms of mentality, the nobles were more positive about the humans than the brown bear. However, what happened next turned everyone's expectations upside down. At this moment, all the nobles present had the same thought, as expected of Darius' grandson. As people of the imperial capital, they obviously had a deep impression of the legendary figure from 60 years ago. And for some of the older nobles, it was as if they had seen the nightmare of the nobles from 60 years ago. The building was still collapsing, and gravel was rolling down. For a moment, the White Rose Garden was silent. The Silver Queen finally opened her mouth. She only said one sentence coldly, "How dare you? Take him down." The 4 witches were in midair. Adatrice opened the gate of the Bunasan kingdom. She was afraid that Brando would repeat his previous trick and escape from under her nose, so she first opened her extreme plane. The lonely hill reflected the dark starry sky, and it spread out in the sky like flowing water, like a giant mouth in the void. But just as she touched the gate, she heard a voice that broke her heart. Scram! Before the golden sea witch could react, she spat out a mouthful of blood and fell from the sky. Beside her, the witch queen's expression changed drastically. She put her hand on the line of law, but before she could say anything, she heard the old woman on the other side trembling as she shouted. Ekis is in the Bunasan. But unfortunately, her voice was destined not to be heard by many people. Because more people were rising into the sky. 1, 2, 3. The sword-bearer Bradley, the lion sword St. Willick, and the other of the twin jade annulus of St. Cantifer Palace, the sword saint of speed, Leo. Then came the Imperial Gate, the Grand Commander of the Flame Knight Order, Richard, the Lord of the Mirror Realm, Lightless Return, and his old rival, Sepan. Almost all of them were old friends and familiar faces from the battle at the Cold Dew Manor. But what followed next was a list of names that Brendel had only seen or heard of in the game before. First was the Grand Commander of the Imperial Guards, Talia, and the other 3 Vice-Commanders of the Flame Knight Order, the Silver-Eye Fine, Saint Maximilian, and the Ascetic Julian. As for the other 3, Brando had never seen or heard of them. It was not surprising that they were the hidden forces of the crew's royal family. But what made him squint his eyes slightly was the last person to rise into the sky. Dragon Queen Gwendolyn. 16 Supreme Realms. A sage. Like the stars in the night sky, they shone for a moment. And above the stars, countless Flame Knight Order were rising into the sky. Specks of stars surrounded the bright stars. All the nobles of the empire present couldn't help but raise their heads and open their mouths. It was unknown whether they were surprised by such a grand scene or by the people who attracted the scene. Under the starry sky, the Silver Queen looked down at Brando with the Empire's night sky as the background. She pondered for a moment before slowly speaking. Descendant of Darius, you have a trait that your grandfather didn't have, and that is, you overestimate yourself. Chapter 1096. This is the land that God promised you. It illuminates the sky like a stream of light. Your wisdom is like a raging flame. Your crown is as noble as the stars. You are the king of the ancestors, the people of God. Blessed are the people of the world. Because God and the kingdom, wisdom and spirit have descended. Alnorma's 7 lines, Dr. 3079. 1-7, Lecantu. Constance's voice was low and long. It passed through the courtyard of the Garden of White Roses and the forest, recounting the past 60 years ago. Your grandfather, Sword Saint Darius, was a genius that only appeared once in 100 years. His bloodline was equally noble. He was the promised one who was born in Karsuk during the year of flowing flame. He was the pride of the Cardoloso family, and you. You were born in the Cardoloso family and received unimaginable glory and pride. You were lucky, but you did not know when to stop. The title of Earth Sword Saint could not protect you forever. The Cardoloso family was nothing in front of the empire. I gave you a chance, but you did not cherish it. The Silver Queen gently raised her right hand and extended her index finger. The tip of her finger was like that of a young girl, slender and long. A drop of golden blood flew out from her fingertip and fused into the void in front of her. After all, mortals could not understand this world. No matter how outstanding their talents were, they were just like the smartest monkeys who could only dominate a group of monkeys. Darius was once such an outstanding promise, but his descendants could not see such a drop of blood flowing from their bodies. This was a pure bloodline. How could the filthy blood flowing in the bodies of the Iron Folk be compared to the glorious and dazzling era of the past? This was the sorrow of the mortal world. That woman's bloodline has also been purified to a certain extent. The head of the Valkyrie, Brunhilde, suddenly spoke. Her low and hollow voice lingered in everyone's ears like a whisper. It seems that Her Majesty's experiment is not hopeless, the Shire replied. Only Medisha did not care about this. Constance's words made the little princess slightly unhappy. She said, the Lord did not rely on anyone. Before this, he did not even know of his own birth. He is only 20 years old. This experience is enough to write an epic even among my people. It is not unprecedented. Me. Medisha shook her head and said softly, I am not as good as the Lord. I am a princess after all. My people have poured as much effort into me as anyone else. Charles smiled and patted the little princess on the shoulder as he said, don't worry. A person's life is like the stars in the sky. When we see the stars decorating the night sky, we often overlook the most dazzling light among them. However, some people are born to shine brightly in an era. The fools have no way of knowing this, and that is why history and books are filled with myths and legends. This is a heavy era. The mortals lost the favor of the gods. Hundreds of millions of lights were extinguished. People used their reverence for the sages to move forward in the darkness. They built kingdoms and cities on top of suffering, and lit torches in the wilderness. The glory of civilization was passed down in the end. But people still held on to the past in one way or another. Some were immersed in the past and did not move forward. But some were not willing to die in the peaceful memories of the past. Some took a step forward. Some were ahead of others. Because of this, after the Myrnas, there were 4 empires standing on the land. The names of the pioneers were carved on the stone tablets. But after thousands of years of wind and frost, the names on the stone tablets were blurred. In the holy palace of the Wind Empress, in Fanzin's holy palace, 2 pairs of calm eyes showed a look of indulgence. Outside White Harbor, the sound of a bell echoed, reminding the sails in the harbor to prepare for the storm. William Peaster looked at the snowstorm. The gigantic figure of the evil dragon Fuchsia was gradually fading away. Her voice came from the snowstorm. We will meet again in the elemental frontier, Bugas. The time had come. In the past 370 years, 1847 promised ones were born in Wonde. Among them, there were 13 chosen ones. In the past 100 years, this number had increased to half. Since the First Era, the progress of history seemed to be shining with the names of geniuses. Every dazzling star had profoundly changed the trajectory of the world. But Brando did not tell the Silver Queen. This was not a sign of the blood of the mortals being purified. The era of the gods had long passed forever. The dark dragon would not descend again. The Myrna's kingdom would eventually become incomplete words in the books. A new era was coming, but it did not bring the glorious past. It was a bloody war. This was the war of the mortal world. Brendel raised his sword, and the gaps between the fragments shone with a dazzling reddish-gold light. He did not cherish the chance of others giving him, but he truly cherished the people around him. Unfortunately, he would not say these. Because he understood that to some people, they were meaningless. This was a principle that only a few people understood. It was summed up by tens of thousands of bloodshed and deaths. The first one to rush in front of him was the Grand Commander of the Flame Family Knights, Imperial Gate Richard. He raised his sword, and the flame blade in his hand clashed with the Grand Commander's sword. Then there was a sharp sound, and sparks burst out from the blades of the two swords. After 3 consecutive strikes, both of them took a step back. Prince Ogios crawled out of the rubble with half of his body. His face was covered in dust as he climbed out of the rubble. His eyes were bloodshot as he watched the scene unfold. This was a battle between Lemeters, but he acted as if he had not heard anything. He had never suffered so much in his life. It was a great humiliation. In the Latch of Wa, his father was above him. But here, no one could control him. The prince's impulsive personality was magnified. The first thing he did was not to check his injuries, but to search for his sword. What a fool, she really doesn't know what's good for her. Scarlet had just waved Firmament back into her hand when she heard Ovina's mocking voice in her mind. A mixed-blood deity of who knows how many generations, and she dares to spout such nonsense. She doesn't even know that your lord. The girl suddenly stopped talking. She curled her lips and said, she doesn't know her place. Scarlet did not understand. She was anxious, but she realized that she still could not help Brando. Because of the blood of God, she had been hovering at the peak of the gold level. She had not even activated her elemental powers. With Firmament's help, she could defeat opponents before the beginning of the elemental powers of truth. But when it came to the peak of the precepts or even the supreme realm, she was still powerless. Ovina seemed to sense her master's mood. She said, "Those 2 idiots are obsessed. Why don't you help them?" "Me?" The Highlander girl paused for a moment, her amber eyes shining brightly. "Can I be of help to my liege?" "Yes, you are a little too weak. But that's normal. You don't have to be discouraged. Did you know that there were a few extremely powerful figures in history? They weren't really geniuses, but through hard work, they were still able to carve their names into the annals of history." "How can I help my lord?" Scarlet asked calmly. Ovina's shadow appeared beside her. She glanced at the battlefield calmly. "It's simple. They want to suppress your lord in terms of bloodline. Why don't you grant them their wish? Open up all the access channels and show them what your lord can do. Open up the access channels." "Access is bloodline, stupid girl. Improve my bloodline." Scarlet was stunned. "How can I do that?" "No." Ovina shook her head vehemently. "Your lord is right. You really are a stupid girl. Bloodline is not up to you to decide. What I mean is for you to open up all the access channels. Open up all the access channels." Scarlet asked again, dumbfounded. It's simple. You are a knight of the Azure Knight. Your access comes from the Gate of Arbitration. You are supposed to be a supervisor and manager. This is your scope of authority. What should I do? Password. The Knight of the Imperial Gate was locked in battle with Brando. Willock had joined the fray. However, they were still evenly matched. It was as if Brando's power had increased by leaps and bounds in the span of a few hours. Willock, who had joined the battle later, felt a chill run down his spine. This young man was too scary. How old was he? He had heard rumors about the sword St. Darius from 60 years ago. Could it be that everyone in the Cartoloso family was as crazy as him? What he didn't know was that after the battle at the Frostdew Manor, Brando finally had time to consolidate the new characteristics of his elements of time and space. As the elements of the power of existence, their potential was beyond anyone's imagination. Behind them, Bradley and Maximilian were being held back by Sydney and Veronica, while Sanleo and Fane joined the battle behind them. Brendel suddenly stopped when he saw Brendel joining the battle. Then, a shield appeared in his hand. On the shield, there were bright flowing flames, a radiant holy church, a supreme laurel crown, and the kingdom of God. A holy sword hung alone in the sky and fell straight into the ground, as if it was going to split the entire world into two. This shield was very familiar to everyone who lived in the center of the empire. It was the angel's holy shield, the symbol of Rushta. The shield of Iroma. The moment Brando took out the shield, the faces of the Supreme Realm powerhouses around him changed. This was the holy relic left by the Flame King for Cruz. How could it fall into the hands of an outsider? Richard was the first to react. His heart was burning with anger, and he was about to explode. However, at the last moment, a strange thought suddenly flashed in his mind. Why could he take away the holy shield? This shield was placed on the Victory Square by Gretel himself. After 1,000 years, no one could get within 3 feet of it. Even if the great holy sea Vara came personally, it was the same. Chapter 1097. While Richard hesitated, Julian the ascetic, who was known for his fiery temper, let out an earth-shattering roar. Shield of Irama, how dare you! Like Sydney, the ascetic sainthood came from the angel of Irama, who wielded the sacred sword. How could he allow others to touch Irama's sacred item? A ring of platinum flames appeared in his eyes. His anger was already burning. Without a word, he threw a punch at Brando. This was a full-powered attack from someone above the Lamiter realm. Rushta had been fighting for the entire night, and this was his strongest attack. Under his punch, the ground of the Garden of the White Rose cracked inch by inch, and the broken stones and stone floated up from the ground as if they had lost their gravity. One could only imagine the power contained in the punch itself. Be careful. Fane shouted angrily at his colleague. Her Majesty wants to capture him alive. Without Irama's approval, he can't use the sacred shield. The words were stuck in his throat. He clearly saw the sacred shield in Brando's hand flash slightly, and all of Julian's attacks were completely nullified. Absolute barrier. This was the legendary ability of the shield of Irama. This was impossible. Fane almost stopped what he was doing. He was not the only one. In fact, all of the supreme-class fighters around Brando who were related to the Holy Cathedral of Fire could not help but pause. They all thought of a terrifying possibility. If this young man had Irama's approval, then, what did this mean? But this question was only meaningful to the experts. To the onlookers, Brando was not in a good situation. Little Nydivan, who was watching the battle from the side, frowned. He did not understand what was going on. He even asked anxiously, why isn't he using that thing? The old Prime Minister patted him on the shoulder and shook his head. The Count has his own plans. You are also the Prime Minister of the Empire. Calm down and show the magnanimity of a noble. Little Nydivan shook his head with a bitter smile. How could he remain calm? This battle not only determined Brando's fate, but also the survival of the Nydivan family. Father, grandfather. A soft voice came from behind the two of them. Old Nydivan and little Nydivan turned around at the same time and saw the Prime Minister's daughter standing there in shock. Delphian. Delphian's face was still a little pale. She raised her head, and her eyes happened to reflect the shocking battle in the White Rose Garden. She then saw the mountain maiden standing in the middle of the crowd. Her fiery red hair made her heart stop slightly. These people, old Nydivan glanced at his granddaughter, shook his head, and slowly turned back to answer, these people, this day, is his stage. Because some people were born to shine in an era. The Prime Minister's daughter had a complicated look in her eyes. But the color in the other pair of eyes was much simpler and more indifferent. Silver Queen Constance looked forward and watched a drop of her blood fly into the void. At this moment, she didn't even care too much about the battle. The result of the battle was inevitable. But for this moment, she had sacrificed too much. The Empire had also prepared for too long. Decades of waiting and misunderstanding. But if the world understood the meaning behind all of this, then she believed that all of this would be meaningful. She raised her head and saw the huge magic array forming in the void. Through this magic array, she looked at the black moon in the sky. There, she seemed to see the backs of two eras intersecting. Everything was ready. Under the arrangement of fate, rumbling sounds came from the sky. It was as if some invisible force swept away the dark clouds in the sky. The running wolves were forced to retreat. Above the clouds, the magic array of the elemental boundary fitted together like gears. They rotated in the sky, one ring after another. Every time the vertical axis moved, the silver lines of law swept across the sky for thousands of miles. In every corner of Wonde, hundreds of millions of people witnessed this spectacle. They saw the clouds shining, and then the shadow of a huge tower that reached the sky descended from the sky. In many places around the White Mountains, in the Silver Coast and Lubeck, and even in the distant Nine Phoenixes to the east, in the Dead Moon Inland Sea, in the polar regions north of Farnesane, and in the great glaciers, boundless darkness began to spread. The eternal night had descended. XX, judgment, light lost. The green sea was calm. In the darkness, the eyes of Eloranta reflected the huge tower. In the ever-misty forest, the singing of the elves and ghosts did not stop for a moment. The same scene was reflected in the exceptionally calm eyes of the Wind Queen. The huge tower hung alone in the sky. The rustling of the pine trees reminded Ondina of the black pine forest in the Grinoires Mountains. She pushed open the door and walked out of her room. She looked up at the scenery in the sky, her eyes sparkling with brilliance. Freya was still talking to Princess Griffine in the room. The candlelight in the room flickered, and a huge map was laid out. A letter was thrown to the side. The letter was opened, and a corner of the letter was revealed. On the pure white letter paper, the pitch-black words were written in a somewhat distorted manner. At the beginning of the month, the Queen of Banshees, Yalvit, led an army to attack the front line of Gold City. The King of the Withered Lands, Lawson the Glutton, attacked the Silman area. A slightly tired but gentle voice sighed. They're here. Mr. Knight never expected them to be wrong, Your Highness. Freya, you like Mr. Knight? I want to give Mr. Knight a gift. Do you know what the best gift is, Freya? I don't know. It's a victory, Freya. But the royal faction, don't worry about them. I'm Haru's sister, the princess of the kingdom. This time, I will fight for the dream that Mr. Knight shares with me. This was the story of the Year of the Sword. At the end of the year, the Black Rose of the Roman Tuo arrived as expected. At that moment, far away in the center of the empire, the Silver Queen was staring blankly at the lonely tower in the sky. It had a wholly white exterior and had once shone brightly for an era. Its name was also the source of the fire of civilization, Babel. It had fallen, and now it had returned. On the battlefield, Prince Ognos was roaring angrily as he pounced at Brando. He gripped a gleaming blade tightly in his hand. The rumbling sound echoed through the clouds. All access to Tiamat and the elemental border had been opened. Scarlet tried her best to speak loudly to Ovina so that her voice wouldn't be drowned out. And then? She asked loudly. Ever since the Planeswalkers left, this was the first time the lines of law between heaven and earth had become so active. Constance looked at her hands in disbelief. This was the power of the divine people. It was even more powerful than she had imagined. Legend had it that the gods could control the network of laws above the elemental border. At that moment, she could clearly feel the connection between the entire world and herself. It was as if she could control the world with the lift of her hand. There seemed to be a stream of light flowing before her eyes. Amidst her astonishment, she saw a silver screen of light appear before her eyes. On the screen were complex words from the oldest civilization. The jumping symbols and words were incomprehensible to mortals, but she could barely make out the meaning. Authority, granted. The Silver Queen finally smiled. It was as if she had returned to the modern world. She saw a pair of wings made of light growing out of Prince Ogios's brown bear-like body. A set of ancient yet strange armor covered his body. He raised his hands high, and the dagger in his hand turned into a shining two-handed longsword. A pillar of light fell upon him and covered his entire body. A warrior's bloodline, although low, was at least different from mortals. Constance raised her hand slightly. After waiting for so long, she finally got her reward, and it was even better than she had imagined. Babel was born. An era had returned. And then, a strange light reflected in Ovina's eyes. It was frighteningly bright. She made a very human-like gesture and licked her lips. And then, all that's left is to wait. Can you really help the Lord? Scarlet asked loudly. Perhaps, Ovina answered. You should trust him more. The sudden surge of power made Ognos' entire body burn. It was as if endless power filled his body. There was no explanation for this, but perhaps there was one. I am the chosen one, the destined ruler of this world. His mind was in a frenzy. He roared, gripped his sword with both hands, and slashed down at Brando with all his might. There was a loud clang. Ognos felt his hands go numb. Then, to his shock, he realized that he had been blocked. But what blocked him was neither Brando's sword nor Brando's shield. It was a strange card. None of the Supreme Class fighters around him noticed, but he could see that card. It was a black and white card. The surface of the card was made of some unknown material. It shone with a strange light. It floated in midair, blocking the blade in his hand. It exuded an indestructible aura. There was no sound in the void, but Ognos clearly heard a thunderous shout in his heart, telling him what the essence of the world was. That was the law. That firm order seemed to form a world of its own. Brando reached out his hand and tapped lightly on the card. Countless mysterious patterns spread from the card, as if they were telling of countless stories that had been buried in history. They were moving, and touching. They were the crusades that knights raised their banners, the promises that warriors kept with their lives. It had a name. It was called loyalty. Loyalty knows no place or time, life or death. Chapter 1098. The card was rising into the sky. The energy in the dark elemental pool quickly dissipated, and Brendel saw countless dark tentacles growing out of the card. These tentacles plunged straight into the ground, and in a flash, they were connected to the other world beneath the Lust Tower. Two powers from different laws met and came to an agreement. It was silent, but it described a law. The card is attached to a non-Darkangel creature and returns it to the battlefield with 5 battle counters. The creature has indestructible and anti-all powers. Even if the creature is removed from battle or placed in a graveyard, the ability will take effect after a long time. Maintain a phase. At that moment, Ognos looked up. Richard, Julian, Willock, and Fane looked up. Conrad and Henriette, who were hiding under the table, looked up. Holy music lingered in the sky. The thick clouds parted to form a door of light, standing opposite Babel Fortress. When the door of light opened, countless swords of light pierced down from the clouds, heading straight for the entire city of Rushta. At that moment, it was as if dawn had broken and the sun had been seen. The 1,000-year-old imperial capital shook violently, and the ground shook violently. No one could stand firm, and even those above the Saint Plane were swaying in midair. The Silver Queen held onto the doorpost and looked at the scene in shock. Ovina, on the other hand, looked pleased. The divine folk are not necessarily planeswalkers, but the most powerful planeswalkers must be the purest of divine folk. Scarlet said nothing. She looked at the Lord and the crowd with reverence in her eyes. The female knight continued, because only they can connect to the outermost rules of Martha's network. That is the language of the world, the power of existence. An angel descended from the sky. It was male or female and had no facial features. Lightning and fire filled the sky and formed a pair of wings behind it. It was as if countless people were chanting behind it. The sound of singing filled the sky. Behind it was like an illusion. Half of it was the twilight war of the gods, and the other half was the gilded Chongqing temple. It walked down from the clouds, and there seemed to be an invisible staircase in the void. With every step it took, the Flame family knights and Lemeters closest to it in the air would be set ablaze, and they screamed as they fell from midair. It looked at Brendel, then pointed its finger forward. Richard, Willock, Leo, Finn, and Urian, who were in front of Brando, spat out a mouthful of blood at the same time and flew back. Iroma was a holy angel, and under the loyalty of the Planeswalker card, her power was infinitely close to that of a demigod. He had fought against Milos while in the Dead Frost Forest. At this very moment, Iroma was the demigod will that ruled over the skies of Rushta. In the blink of an eye, the Empire had lost 3 Lemeters and severely injured more than 5. Only a few Lemeters who had yet to attack Brando, as well as the witches and magi who were still chanting their spells, remained. Constance couldn't believe what she was seeing. Even in her deepest nightmares, she had never imagined a scene like this. The guardian of the Empire for thousands of years, the angel Iroma, had appeared in front of her and stood behind her enemy. What was wrong with this world? Originally, it was the most inconspicuous part of the whole plan, but now it almost overturned all the cards on the table. In the air, Dragon Queen Gwendolyn was the first to retreat. She looked at Iroma in the air and Brando on the ground in surprise. Her eyes were filled with the most fanatical colors, but she muttered to herself. So it's like this, it's like this. This is just right. Brando didn't even look at the two of them. Instead, he turned to look at Ogios, who was the only one in front of him, and said, "Do you remember what I said to you before?" The latter opened his mouth wide and froze. Brando's gaze passed through him. A pillar of fire descended from the sky and turned the Highlander prince into ashes. The latter didn't even have time to scream before he completely disappeared from this world. Everyone who witnessed this scene couldn't help but keep quiet out of fear. Stop it! The Silver Queen, who was in a daze for a long while, finally reacted. She couldn't help but shout out in rage. Ogios was an important part of her plan, and yet he was killed by Brando just like that. Brando then looked at her and replied, "Your Majesty, I've said before that Scarlet's will is free. I hope you can respect her wishes." The Silver Queen took a deep breath. She couldn't understand how a mortal who wasn't even Su Ying's person could have such great power. She clearly saw Brando's blood. It was the filthy blood of the Iron Folk. "You?" She gritted her teeth and asked, "Who on earth are you?" "I'm the descendant of Darius Cardeloso, a mortal," Brando answered without hesitation. Was there such a mortal? The few sword saints who were lying on the ground in a daze had this strange thought in their minds. The Silver Queen gritted her teeth so hard that they made grinding sounds. Brando continued, "Your Majesty, Iroma has protected the people of Cruz for 1,000 years. The power of its holy position comes from the position of the angel who wields the holy sword. Do you know which holy sword it is?" "What does that have to do with me?" Constance said angrily. But a voice answered her question. "It's the holy sword Amber." Medicia's voice rang out. The Silver Elf Princess was previously engaged in a battle with an ultimate sword saint. But now that the ultimate sword saint had been reduced to ashes, she finally had the time to speak. "That's the holy sword that mortals control their own fate. The sword is engraved with the promises of the ancient spirits to this world. Everyone can control their own fate. And mortals, it was with this spirit that they resisted the invasion of dusk. And the sages, it was with this spirit that they resisted the rule of the Dark Dragon. 1,000 years ago, it was like this. 1,000 years later, it's still like this." "Humph, what a joke," the Silver Queen interrupted her. "These are just lies made up by the Silver Elves, the Bugas, and the Four Sages. The mortals stole the authority that originally belonged to the gods, so the gods left. Unfortunately, you don't understand at all. The power that the mortals obtained is not even worth mentioning compared to the true gods." She glanced contemptuously at Emma, who was still in midair. "A mere holy position that isn't even a demigod, is this what you're relying on? Very well, I'll let you see the true power of the gods." Constance raised her hand. The blood of the divine people flowed in her body, powerful and pure. But at this moment, she felt a little regretful. Unfortunately, this wasn't the purest blood. But it didn't matter. The entire plan was about to go back on track. With this thought in mind, she pointed her index finger at Brando. Everyone saw that the reflection of the Tiamat Codex in the sky outside the elemental border suddenly formed 4 shadows. 4 giant magic circles began to rotate slowly. After the clouds dispersed, 4 giant arcs of light, hundreds of miles wide, appeared directly above Rushta, overlapping each other above Brando's head, forming a majestic and mysterious magic circle. Every single person below the formation was shocked. At this moment, they all felt as if they were being locked down by a powerful and unstoppable will. "This is..." Royals suddenly stopped his spell and looked at what was happening in the sky in shock. Why did the level of the magic network increase? A spell beyond the 14th circle, Sepan added in a low voice beside him. Beside him, Scarlet's face was pale. She almost instinctively reached out to grab Ovina's hand, but she grabbed nothing. What's going on, Lady Ovina?" But Ovina was smiling. "Don't be afraid, little girl. Just wait and see. The show has just begun." A terrifying aura pressed down on the sky above Rushta, making it hard for everyone to breathe. The wolves running outside the city and the frenzied children of evil even stopped and looked at the sky with fear. Thousands or even tens of thousands of years ago, it was this power that had made them their enemy. Silver Queen laughed maniacally. "What do you think the divine people are relying on to fight against the Twilight Dragon? With those laughable tricks of yours? How foolish." She looked at Brendel with some satisfaction, hoping to find fear on his face. But unfortunately, she was destined to be disappointed. Because Brando's expression was blank. In fact, he couldn't help but be blank. Because the moment the Silver Queen activated her powers, he realized that his retina was being washed. This was something that had never happened before. His game system seemed to have gone crazy. Suddenly, numerous inquiry boxes popped up in front of him, and various menus flew in like snowflakes. This situation was a bit like the situation when his computer was infected with a virus. One after another, light screens opened in front of him, and a stream of data poured down like a waterfall. There were all kinds of information on it, and finally, it stopped at a picture. Of course, it wasn't a blue screen. It was a light purple screen. There was a circle on it, and in the center was the Ouroboros emblem. It spun and then flattened out. Then a choice popped up. Yes or no. At that moment, Brando seemed to be enlightened. He finally understood what this was. This was the demigod mode's authorization. In the past game, the Dragon of the Sky, Teoscras, in the final battle against Ekis, had once shared this authorization with the strongest player. In the video, he had seen the exact same scene, but the emblem was not the same. That was the emblem of the dragon god Bahamut and his. Why did it look a bit like the emblem of All for One? He remembered that at that time, it was obtained by the guild master of the strongest guild, Diamond Force. And at this moment, the same scene reappeared in front of him. At this moment, it was as if he had returned to that past dream. Everything that happened in the past was still vivid in his memory. Brando couldn't help but laugh. He looked up with a smile and looked at the Silver Queen in front of him with a strange gaze. He could not help but feel a little sympathy, a little pity. At this moment, a voice reached his ears. Her Majesty the Queen has gathered 3 divine people and requested to reopen the Truth Parliament. As the inheritors of the Azure Lance, Scarlet and I have strictly examined her request. We have agreed to this request and temporarily assigned Tiamat's authority to all the authority holders present. The highest authority record is the Throne of Destiny, with the emblem of Martha. The lowest authority record is the Warrior, with the emblem of Tiamat. Recording complete. The meeting will last for 15 minutes. Ovina's voice paused. Little one, hurry up. Brando was stunned. He glanced at the Silver Queen and wondered if he was one of the 3 divine people. But judging by Her Majesty the Queen's behavior, she did not seem to consider him as one of them. But that was not important. He waved his hand lightly. It was a casual gesture. But in the next moment, Royal and Saipan simultaneously felt their connection to the magic network completely cut off. The strange armor on the Highlander prince suddenly dimmed. Even the angel Iroma behind Brando, after a flash of light, lowered her head slightly and stopped breathing. The terrifying aura that had locked onto the entire Lushta suddenly disappeared. Everyone looked up and saw the Tiamat magic circle in the air begin to rotate and reset. The Silver Queen looked at Brando as if she had seen a ghost. Her bloodline came from a high-ranking divine person, so she understood what had happened better than a chosen one like Ogios. The network of law was cutting off all ports except for the highest authority. How is this possible? You're just an iron person. She felt a chill run down her spine and even began to tremble. The power of the network of law was disappearing very quickly. Soon, even her footsteps became weak and she almost fell to the ground. How can you have? Brando looked at her. After a while, he spoke. His voice seemed to pass through the clouds and made the whole world buzz. Your Majesty the Queen, are you calm now? Chapter 1099. The leaves hanging on the branches drooped down, and the insects quieted down. In the vast courtyard, it was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. Everything happened so quickly that the nobles did not have time to react. In the blink of an eye, their supreme queen was kneeling on the 31st step of the St. Cantifer Palace. More than half of the Empire's supreme-class fighters were dead or injured. The entire Garden of the White Rose was a mess. The Imperial Guards were scattered everywhere, and the Flame family knight was unconscious. The descendant of Sword Saint Darius was still standing at the main entrance, unharmed. He did not even move half a step. The Silver Queen had ruled the Empire for decades, but the nobles were not satisfied. Although the previous emperor was powerful, he still gave the nobles some face. The queen treated the nobles like her pet dogs, and the harmony between the nobles and the royal family was long gone. But the opponents had already left. Those present were the queen's close followers. The nobles could not accept letting a foreigner flaunt his power in the empire, even if this person was the grandson of Sword Saint Darius. But the problem was that no one dared to make a move. With Brando's strength, how could they oppose him? Thus, there was an awkward silence in the room for a while. Until the sound of a sword being sheathed broke the silence. Brando sheathed his sword and walked slowly into the Garden of the White Rose. After he mocked the Silver Queen, he did not even look at her. He just walked straight to the stunned mountain girl. Scarlet looked at him blankly. Her expression was blank, and it was a little funny. She seemed to be under some kind of spell and froze on the spot. Until Brando walked to her side, he reached out and tucked the messy hair in front of her forehead behind her ear. He said to her, "Sorry, I'm late, Scarlet." Hundreds of people watched the scene in silence. The nobles of the Empire were speechless. Medicia's eyes were filled with gratification and envy. The Shire and Mephistopheles smiled. Vahina bit her lower lip. Endrique looked away in boredom. Old Nydevan and the Archduke of Flowerleaf shook their heads. They did not show their emotions like the young people, but they did not know what to say. On one hand, they had witnessed the birth of a legend, but the stepping stone was the Empire. If this had happened in Fanzan, even the two old men would have been able to talk about it for a long time. But it happened to be in the Empire. Delphian watched this scene with a complicated expression. Everything she knew seemed to have been completely overturned in the previous moment. At this moment, the Prime Minister's daughter's mind was completely blank. She suddenly felt an indescribable pain in her heart, and even her fingertips turned slightly white. She could not see her inner thoughts clearly, but the shyness on her body gradually faded. After such a long journey, she had quickly matured. When Brando brushed her hair behind her ear and felt the heat from his hand, the mountain girl trembled slightly. She silently lowered her head and leaned against the Lord's warm chest. She began to sob. This was completely out of Brando's expectations. The mountain girl's boldness was like a sharp arrow that struck his heart, but he did not even have time to react before a deep heartache surged into his heart. He could clearly feel how thin and weak the girl was in his arms. Her shoulders trembled slightly, as if countless days and nights of uneasiness and fear that could not sleep had seeped into her heart. The helplessness and sorrow of being at the mercy of others was so deep and heart-wrenching. Only those who had experienced it personally could understand it, and those high and mighty figures simply could not understand it. At this moment, Brando could only think of Erwin, who was burning in flames. At that time, their fates were so similar to this girl's. He and the others who had lost the support in their hearts were even more helpless than Scarlet at this moment. Silently, he could not help but hate the Silver Queen even more in his heart. But it was at this moment that he felt something cold and soft touch his lips. This was not a small matter. Brando widened his eyes and found that Scarlet's arms had unknowingly wrapped around his neck. She raised her head, closed her eyelashes slightly trembling, and the cute fine hair on her cheeks could be seen clearly. Brando seemed to have been hit by a strange magic, and was completely unable to move. Hundreds of imperial nobles watched this scene unfold with their eyes wide open. They looked at the two young people who were kissing, and they were unable to make a single sound. For the nobles, this was such a beautiful scene. A knight saving the princess, perfectly in line with the pursuit of beauty and romance of the upper class of the empire. But what made them feel awkward was that they did not know how to face this scene. They did not even dare to look at Her Majesty, lest she see that their hearts were shaken. Scarlet is so brave. Medisha sighed softly. But even I have to admit, the Shire replied, this is a reward that the Lord deserves, and this miracle is worth a kiss. I really can't say which one is more valuable between the two. Mr. the Shire, please be careful with your words. Medisha glanced at the unruly wizard. Don't worry, I'll keep it a secret in front of the Roman lady. But I don't think she'll care. The Shire winked. This time, even Medisha was speechless. Her face was also red. Old Prime Minister Naidevan did not express his opinion. He was rather old-fashioned when he was young, and the previous emperor had taken a liking to his steadiness. However, he was still tolerant and lenient towards young people. The Archduke of Flower Leaf chuckled, as if he was reminded of his own romantic and unruly youth. He patted his daughter's shoulder lightly. What a good lad. Father, Vahina snorted fiercely, I'm running away from home. Running away from home again. The Duke of Flower Leaf could not help but laugh. The girl rolled her blue eyes. As for what she was thinking, it was hard to say. The Silver Queen was also watching this scene. He's completely different from his grandfather. At this moment, the Queen had such a strange thought in her mind. Even the depression and pain from her failure had mostly dissipated. She knelt on the cold marble floor. The reflective floor could almost reflect her beautiful face. It was a face that was not eroded by the passage of time. In that face, she saw herself when she was a princess. That was such a good time. Unfortunately, she could barely remember it. When did things start to change? She thought silently. It was a dark and deep corridor. On both sides of the corridor were arched windows, and the arched windows reflected many memories of the past. She saw the wilderness of the Four Realms, the beautiful spring scenery, the sunny courtyard, herself and her sisters, her brother, and her father, the great Emperor Grantokri. It was like something that happened in another dream. It was hazy, like the moon in the water. She saw countless banners, and the glory of the empire had just begun. Her father passed the throne to her, and she passed it to her brother's first son. She saw the glorious palace, and the empire's territory expanding in all directions under her gaze. Then, war broke out, and the knights bravely attacked the army of the undead. Decades later, she grew old, and her face was full of wrinkles. The empire grew stronger day by day, and she gradually could not remember the things of her youth. However, a flame still burned in her heart. In the end, I did not go against my father's wishes. She stood in the darkness and saw everything that had happened in her dream. Her bare feet stepped on the cold floor and she looked at her old self. She was dressed in white and she was still young, but she was so helpless that it was as if she had been abandoned by the entire world. Why? Why was it like this? She looked at her hands, which were slender and long. Decades had passed, and she did not carve a single pattern on them. However, they were so pale that they looked like ghosts. Drip. A drop of cold liquid fell on her palm. Constance realized that she was crying. How many years had it been since the last time she cried? She could not remember. The dreamscape shattered like a mirror. The shining shards cut her skin, and blood flowed out, shining with a golden light. However, she did not feel it at all. She finally remembered everything that happened in the distant dream. At the end of the corridor, she saw the mysterious altar. It was exactly the same as it was 60 years ago. Even the furnishings around it had not changed at all. She saw her 16-year-old self, the Dragon Queen Gwendolyn, and that tall and handsome figure. The three of them fell beside the altar. On the altar was a baby girl. Her features were picturesque, and she was so perfect that she seemed to be the masterpiece of the Creator. "Your Highness, you can't do this. Mr. Darius, this is my fault. I have to take responsibility for it. Do you want to watch the whole world die with us? Lady Gwendolyn, you have to stop Her Highness. Gwendolyn, you are a court warlock. You are responsible for the survival of the Empire. Help me complete this ritual." "But, Your Highness, Gwendolyn, there are many princesses in the Empire, but there is only one wound. Your Highness, I have made up my mind. If I can protect the Empire, protect this land that I love deeply, it is also my greatest wish." The Silver Queen looked at her 16-year-old self in a daze. She looked at the Silver Princess of the Empire, and tears fell from her eyes uncontrollably. The memories became so vivid and deep. The fragments of the past that had abandoned her for decades seemed to come alive at this moment. She finally remembered that it was the beginning of everything, and also the end of everything. The scene in front of her began to change. It was a scene from countless eons ago. The meteorites that fell from the sky burned through the clouds, leaving streaks of light in the golden red sky. Countless people were fleeing across the boundless plains. There were still sporadic battles happening on the elemental frontier. Occasionally, there would be a flash of explosion, dotting the vicinity of the Babel fortress. She saw a giant dragon covering half the sky. Its wings stretched from the south of the Great Plains to the north, crossing the sky. Its curved neck was like a giant tower on top of the clouds. Its entire body was emitting endless pressure. There was a rumbling sound between the clouds, and the shining tower was falling apart. She saw another scene. The blood-red setting sun passed through the 12 obsidian pillars and shone into the hole. The crystal lattice network on the smooth floor shone brightly. A group of people in robes was slowly walking into the hole. One of them raised his head and looked around. There were a total of 13 people around him. They wore the same robes, but different colors. "I suggest that the Truth Symposium be activated," a voice said. "Agreed. The Truth Symposium agrees. The Ring of Ashes agrees." "Agreed." The person she saw was wearing a robe with red on the left and black on the right. There was a dark gold collar at the collar, and the robe was wrapped with an Ouroboros. Another voice said, "The Silver Eye is in charge of recording the meeting and will not participate in the voting." The speaker was wearing a gray robe with a silver collar. The emblem on his robe was a giant round door. Long and narrow I grew out of the door, as if it was looking down at the world and everything. A voice appeared in the Silver Queen's mind. "The Eye of Quinnen, the Silver Symposium." The people on both sides of this person were wearing the same attire, but the emblem on the giant door was different. One was an evergreen spear, and the other was a silver scale. "The administrator of the Gate of Arbitration is absent," one of them said. "Then the judge will not express his opinion." Another person agreed. "The arbitration tribunal will withdraw from the meeting." The person in charge of the Silver Eye said immediately. "Agreed." The host of the meeting said. "The Earth Legion appoints Odin as the plenipotentiary." The two people on the right spoke. They were wearing black robes with golden collars. The emblem was the 7 stars in the ring, but the stars were different. Two voices sounded in her mind. "The Dragon of Fury, Alphonse, the Dragon of Wisdom, Crystal." Then, the next moment, the Silver Queen saw everyone looking at her. I agree," she answered automatically. "Passed." The host raised his hand. "Next, we will vote by absentee. Those who object, take a step forward." There was dead silence in the hall. All votes. Plan name. Curved surface. Serial number. AE 9730334X. Code name. Won't plan. The voice gradually turned into a buzzing sound. She seemed to be in the middle of a busy market, participating in it personally, but also looking on coldly from the sidelines. Some of the words became clear in her ears, while others became muffled, and then intermittent. The Silver Queen stood in the crowd blankly, as if she finally remembered that she had experienced all this herself. That might have been countless years ago, or it might have been decades ago. She suddenly felt a little scared and shook her head gently. Lady Martha, no, please. But the light in front of her still lost, and everything became pitch black. In the darkness, there was the sound of a girl crying. Chapter 1100. It was as if yesterday had reappeared. The deepest nightmare in the dream was an abyss that she would rather die than return to. But at this moment, it was displayed in front of her. Pain had once intertwined in the heart of the young princess. Even after decades of calming down, in the heart of the old queen, it was difficult to heal. There was only one monotonous color in the boundless gray field. The air was cold and pungent, and gray snow was falling from the sky. But when it fell on her hand, she realized that it was a thin layer of dust. The boundless gray dust fell from the sky and landed on the ground, covering everything. The thick dust was knee-deep. There were some trees in the distance. They were also gray, but before they could get close, they had already turned into ashes. This monotonous color outlined the outline of this world. The surroundings were empty. There was neither sound nor vitality. The Silver Queen walked forward absent-mindedly, one step deep and one step shallow. Like a puppet, she trudged along the endless plain. There was only emptiness in her eyes. She had long known what she would see, but she could not stop herself from moving forward. Occasionally, there was a rumbling sound above the thick and heavy dark clouds. A blood-red lightning flashed through the clouds and zigzagged into the distance along the clouds, lighting up the undulating mountains in the distance. This was the only evidence of the passage of time in this world. She did not know how long she had walked. The world was forever empty until she saw the shadows of some tall hills. There were some corpses of giant beasts. Some were like giants, some were like dragons. Their surfaces were covered in thick dust and they were motionless. Some might still be in the same state as when they were alive. It was as if they had experienced a tragic disaster, freezing the last moment of their lives at the end of time. But they had long been silent. A mountain appeared in front of her. It lay there quietly. It was like a giant dragon. Its whole body was made of cold metal, but the surface of the metal was transparent and shining. It was covered with a crystal grid. She shivered slightly. But she still could not stop her hand from gently touching it. It was cold to the touch. There was no organic matter on the surface, but the giant body responded with a gloomy aura of death and suffocating sadness. Tears rolled down her face uncontrollably. She let out a whimper like an injured beast. The dragon's head was lying flat on the ground quietly with its eyes closed. 2 of its 3 pairs of horns were broken, and its wings were drooping down, covering an area of 100 miles. There were no sounds or words to describe this scene, but the Silver Queen knew from the first moment that it was dead. He was like a god who had entered his twilight and was in eternal slumber. She was so sad that she couldn't restrain herself. It was as if a sharp blade had stabbed into her heart. She couldn't help but cry out loud. 60 years ago, she was here crying like a helpless child. Because all hope was lost. The name of this dragon was Bahamut. It was the king of all dragons, the platinum dragon god, the symbol of courage and hope for mankind. It had protected Wone for tens of thousands of years. But it was dead. Without a sound. With tears and wounds, the Silver Queen finally stopped crying. She bit her lower lip coldly and walked around the mountain of corpses and the huge head of the dragon. She silently walked along Bahamut's cold chin, and then a tragic and desperate doomsday unfolded in front of her without any warning. She shivered and tried hard to stop herself from looking at this scene. The deepest fear in her heart rose. She gasped and couldn't help but lean on Bahamut's body. It was a battlefield. Hundreds of millions of corpses were scattered in it. Huge clusters of crystals, dying dragons, heroic human knights, the bones of griffins, giant insects, elves, dwarves, each maintained the last posture of their lives and stood quietly on this battlefield. It was quiet and cold as before. Then she saw the dragon of war, Tiamat, crystals and Alphonse, Tsanglan, and many other gods. They were all dead. These great beings had disappeared with the whole world. In the gray and lifeless air, the elements floated wildly, like a bunch of dispersing electric currents, struggling in the wilderness. The laws that bound them had long disappeared. The foundation that civilization and order relied on to maintain was gone. She walked forward numbly until a knight came into her sight. In the middle of the corpses of the 4 elemental kings, the knight stood proudly with a spear in her hand. The green spear in her hand was like an emerald, lighting up the only bright color in this world. But the spear was broken in half, and the knight's heartbeat had been silent for a long time. She had also passed away. That young and immature face was full of serenity and determination, but it deeply pierced the Silver Queen's heart. It was exactly the same as when she knelt in front of this knight 60 years ago. There was only endless sorrow in her heart. No matter how she struggled, she could not change history in the end. The world was still the same as what she saw 60 years ago, sliding into the same trajectory. She had failed. She was too weak to do anything. She suddenly felt how ridiculous she was. She thought she had seen everything clearly, but in the end, she was still too stupid. It turned out that this was the sorrow of the mortal world. At the moment when the curtain fell, no one could break free. They were like puppets on the stage, and their fate was never in their own hands. She looked in front of her silently. That was the end of the world. A lonely cliff stood in the void, and flashes of lightning intertwined in the sea of chaos. The elements were falling apart, and the cornerstones of the world fell off piece by piece, collapsing into the billowing clouds. A long whimper came from the chaos, resounding through the sky. A giant beast was cruising in it. Its back cut through the void, like a towering mountain range. The Silver Queen stared blankly at this terrible creature as it turned its body over, and its giant fins almost swept the world. That was Leviathan, a giant beast that was born in the chaos. Lord Martha. Why? The Silver Queen suddenly murmured. At the end of time, this is the inevitable end of our world. I'm sorry, my people. A gentle voice stroked her heart. But I've tried my best to change it. Why? Because the price is too heavy for us. We put our hope in the hands of the Black Iron people. We don't have the power to do it again, but I tried to correct that mistake. If you could, no, I've already failed. She shook her head in pain. Lord Martha, I'm sorry. The mortals stole your authority, but I can't return it to your hands. The mortals stole my authority, but you might be able to choose another path for our world. But I've already failed. She suddenly froze. She spoke with a trembling voice. Lord Martha. The mortals stole my authority, but you might be able to choose another path for our world. The gentle voice repeated. The mortals stole my authority, but you might be able to choose another path for our world. The mortals stole my authority, but you might be able to choose another path for our world. The Silver Queen seemed to have been struck by lightning, and her face quickly lost all color. She trembled and stepped back, and then she bumped into a soft human body. She turned around abruptly and saw the Dragon Queen Gwendolyn in front of her. You haven't failed, Your Majesty. The latter's voice was unusually gentle, and it overlapped with the former's voice. Gwendolyn looked down at her with a slight smile on her face. The Silver Queen opened her mouth, and there was deep fear in her silver eyes. Why? The latter stretched out her hands and gently cupped her face, and smiled gently at her. You are so innocent and kind. Your heart is pure and flawless. Your Highness, no one is more suitable than you to carry that will. Gwendolyn lowered her head and kissed her gently on the forehead. Good night, my baby. The Silver Queen's eyes lost focus, and there was only endless regret left in her heart. Darkness spread in her field of vision. Your Majesty. Your Majesty. Your Majesty, what's wrong? The entire White Rose Garden was in an uproar. Everyone immediately noticed the abnormality in the Silver Queen, and the order among the nobles seemed to be in an instant. Everyone rushed to the center of the garden in a panic. Under everyone's gaze, the Silver Queen fell to the ground, face up. She looked at the sky in a daze, and blood gushed out from her eyes, nostrils, ears, and mouth. Her eyes were empty, and there was the sorrow of a dying person. Until a person slowly walked out from the crowd and came to the side of the Supreme of the Empire. At that moment, everyone fell silent and involuntarily made way for this person. Your Majesty. The Silver Queen recognized this voice. When she was a young girl, this voice used to be one of the most authoritative voices in the court. It was unquestionable, and it made people feel at ease. More importantly, it was the only memory she had with her father, Grand Attila the Great. It was the empire 60 years ago, glorious and warm. The empire of that era had two voices, as if as long as the owners of these two voices still existed in the empire, the country would continue to be stable and strong. Lord Nydivan. At that moment, Her Majesty remembered a lot. She even recalled the past in St. Xantippe Palace, the memories of every learning under the supervision of various strict teachers. The history of the empire, the glory of the royal family, the faith of the people, were all engraved in her heart. The queen, who was like a young girl, smiled slightly, but she was so weak that she could barely show such an expression. I was wrong. I'm sorry, I failed to live up to my father's expectations. Old Nydivan pursed his lips, and he couldn't say a word. He witnessed the growth of the princess with his own eyes, and watched her become the pride of the empire. She was the most outstanding princess of Cruz, and the most glorious and proud princess in the eyes of countless people. He then watched her ascend to the throne and watched the empire prosper under her rule. Suddenly, when he looked back, the gentle and smart princess seemed to still exist in his memory of yesterday. She was sitting next to an arched window in St. Xantippe Palace. The bright afternoon sun passed through the floating dust and quietly fell on her knees. Her eyes were bright and clear, and she carefully listened to the detailed and trivial history and knowledge. Teacher, I hope that the 4 holy cathedrals can return to the era of glory. In the distant future, we will open up a wider territory, perhaps the civil war between civilizations will be eliminated because of this. I have to prove that what the 4 sages did back then was correct. One day, once we succeed, people will no longer be confused. Old Nydivan suddenly felt that there was someone beside him. He turned around and found that it was the great holy See Vala. The old man's expression was equally serious. Only then did he remember that the princess was once his student. The Silver Queen quieted down. It was as if she felt Vala's presence. But she didn't speak. She only listened carefully to the wind that belonged to this era. For her, perhaps this was the last time. After a long time, she spoke in a weak voice. I have something to say to Count Tonajol. Old Nydivan and Vala turned around at the same time and looked at Brando in the Garden of White Roses. The latter was comforting Scarlet, and could not help but frown when he felt the two's gaze. In his opinion, the Silver Queen deserved it. Besides, he was not willing to get into trouble at this time. But at this moment, he saw the pleading in the eyes of the two old men. The old Prime Minister was fine, but Vala had helped him at a critical moment. He could not refuse the other's request. He patted Scarlet's shoulder gently and came to the Queen's side. When he saw Her Majesty the Queen again, he was slightly surprised. He did not expect the Dragon Queen to act so decisively. The once insufferably arrogant Queen was now so weak that she could barely speak a complete sentence. Her youthful eyes revealed a dying luster, and it was obvious that she would not be alive for long. Her Majesty looked at him steadily, as if she wanted to see the shadow of another person in him. Brando could not bear it and asked, "Is it the Dragon Queen, Your Majesty? Where is that woman?" The Silver Queen shook her head weakly. She reached out her trembling hand. Brando felt a little helpless. Facing the Queen in this state, he found that he could not harden his heart. He could only bow his head silently. Only in this way could the Silver Queen's hand reach his cheek. The slender fingertips gently stroked the face, and gradually overlapped with the impression in her heart. She opened her mouth and said with some difficulty, "Treat the Roman well." This sentence was like a bolt of lightning piercing into Brando's heart. The hair all over his body stood up in an instant. He stared at the weak Queen, not understanding why she would say such a thing. But the Silver Queen did not answer his question. She slowly withdrew her right hand, took off a ring from her finger, and then pressed the ring on his chest. On the ring was the supreme emblem of the Empire. "Tell your grandfather that I love him." She had never regretted it. This was not something a supreme person should say, but at this moment, no one stood up to criticize her. Only the old Prime Minister Nydivan looked at the Silver Queen's action with his mouth agape. "Your Majesty, you don't understand." "Prime Minister." The Silver Queen gently interrupted him, "The authority of the mortal world has passed away. Our world needs a hope, and I must make up for my mistakes." A moment later, the ring slipped from her hand. Her Majesty's hand fell gently. She closed her eyes. The thick and beautiful eyelashes no longer moved. In the darkness, she finally remembered how everything had changed. "Darius, you must send the baby girl away. If necessary, kill her. Hurry, I'm afraid I'll regret it. I will send her away, but Your Highness, your physical condition worries me." "What happened to you?" She just smiled slightly. "I am your knight, you must answer my question." "Madam Gwendolen, what's going on?" the voice asked angrily. "Mr. Darius, the princess is right. The Bugis and the dragon will be here soon. We must arrange everything before then." "Perhaps so, but if you can't answer the question in my heart, you will see my stubbornness." The Dragon Queen sighed. "The power of the baby girl is beyond our imagination. In order to save the princess' life, I divided her soul into two and used her kind personality to seal that existence. I don't know how long this will work, my lady, you'd better be mentally prepared. The princess' temperament may change greatly in the future. I've done my best. Then the Bugis." Gwendolen's voice trailed off, as if all the sounds began to become faint, as if an angel was whispering in her ear. Before the eternal darkness fell, she seemed to see a shining holy sword. She knew. That sword was called Amber. It was the sword that changed the fate of the entire world. P.S. There was a bug in yesterday's article, mainly caused by the revision of the previous article and the omission of this draft. Here to clarify, the Highlander prince has been reduced to ashes. Secondly, I'd like to talk about the next volume. The next volume is Amber's sixth and final volume. It's tentatively named Throne of Destiny. Amber has been writing for 5 years, and more than half of the plot has been completed. It's about to come to an end. The original intention of this book was to incorporate a yearning for idealism, which is why people often say that this book is overly idealistic. However, I believe that the pursuit of idealism is one of the reasons why human nature is so noble. Looking back in history, for thousands of years, regardless of whether the truth that human beings were pursuing was right or wrong, perhaps even if the process was absurd and amusing, the driving force that drove them to pursue the right had always pushed our world forward toward civilization and order. Even if there is a moment of regression, we can always look at the shining point in human nature and let it bring us out of ignorance. Perhaps desire is ugly, but at least we know how to introspect. Chapter 1101. The empire had lost its ruler, and a princess had been laid to rest on the land she loved so much. In the midst of the chaos, Brando quietly retreated. A moment ago, he was the center of the whirlpool, but now, he was on the periphery. Not many people noticed him, except for one noble from Erewhon. Only the old prime minister bent down shakily, picked up the ring on the ground with his hand, and looked back at him, his cloudy eyes full of complex emotions. Brando came to Scarlet's side. He looked up, his eyes sweeping over the Shire, Medisha, and the others, his heart full of emotions. The passing of life was so simple, often in the next moment, you did not know who would be with you. He was worried about the safety of the Roman and Hippamra, and the Silver Queen's last words had brought a strong sense of foreboding, like a gloomy ghost. Why would the Empire invite a small merchant on Erewhon's diplomatic list? In terms of business talent, the Roman had just emerged, and in terms of capital, she was far from the big chamber of commerce in Ampere Seal. Brando then remembered that there was indeed something suspicious on the list, but he did not notice it at all, and his heart was full of self-blame. However, he did not think about how inconspicuous it was. Tonagel and Erewhon were no different to the Empire. They were both small insignificant places, but the latter had a lord who defeated the Holy Cathedral of Fire, and the Empire had reason to be curious about everything that happened in this land. The crowd moved slowly, bypassing Brando and Scarlet. The Silver Queen's death could be counted as the two conspirators, but at this moment, no one dared to mention it. The nobles seemed to have forgotten this point. The old prime minister did not say a word, so who would dare to overstep their authority? Some people could not even protect themselves. Who could guarantee that the officials and families promoted by the Silver Queen would not be punished after the eldest son took the throne? The prime minister was about to return to power. A small piece of pure land appeared in the crowd. Scarlet held the azure lance and stood silently beside Brando, as if she had found a familiar position. He was like a silent guardian. Brando turned around and said to the latter, "Scarlet, where is Miss Ovina?" Scarlet paused, and Ovina's voice came from the azure lance. "I'm here, what can I do for you, sir?" "Miss Ovina, you know what Her Majesty is doing, right?" "There are many answers to this question, and I have to consider how to answer depending on which identity you are speaking to me," Ovina answered seriously. "Is there a difference?" "Of course there is. If you are speaking to me as an ancestor, then I will tell you everything. She wants to reopen the Truth Parliament. If you are speaking to me as the Lord of Abes or the Count of Tonagel, then I will tell you that I have no comment. Ancestor. Truth Parliament." Brando thought of the many descriptions of the ancestors in the Pale poem. This term sometimes referred to the divine people, and sometimes it referred to the followers of the ancient kings, the first batch of nobles after the War of the Holy Saints. But the ancestors that Ovina spoke of were more like a proper term, because the divine people did not predate her by much. As for the Truth Parliament, he had never heard of it before. He had heard of the Truth Society, but he did not know the connection between the two. Ovina floated out of the azure lance, like an invisible ghost floating in the air. The people around her ignored her appearance. Her delicate little face was the same as a certain merchant's. She glanced at Brando and said, "The ancestors are relative to the newborn and the mixed-blood divine people. This question is a bit complicated for you, but all you need to know is that they are all divine people. The newborn is the general term for the first 3 generations of bloodline, and the mixed-blood divine people are the descendants of the divine people who were artificially bred and naturally bred. As for the ancestors," she paused. "Legend has it that they were the ones who created this world with Martha, but as for their origins, I am not sure." "Then you are saying that I am an ancestor?" Brando asked. Ovina floated up and circled Brando from left to right. She said with some confusion, "Your aura is a bit strange. Although your bloodline is undoubtedly the Iron People, your authority comes from the Truth Society. As far as I know, the divine people who have the authority of the Truth Society are mostly the first 3 generations of newborn. But you are a bit special. You have the aura of Gaia's will. Only the ancestors and Lady Martha are born from Gaia's will." Brando did not catch the main point of this sentence. His attention was caught by something else. "You said the Truth Society." He thought of the handsome humans in black and red robes he had seen in his dreams. The Truth Society is the central organization of the divine people. They are the leaders of the divine people. The Tribunal, the World Tree Organization, the Earth Army, and the divine people in Gaia's will are all directly under their leadership. The Tribunal, the World Tree Organization, the Earth Army, and Gaia's will. Brando realized that there were more and more terms that he did not understand. Other than the World Tree Organization, he had never heard of any of the other terms in the game. However, after coming to this world, he learned about the composition of the Earth Army. That's not easy to explain. Plus, in my era, the divine people's bloodline had already withered. Much of the knowledge from the previous eras was lost. However, you can understand it as an existence similar to the Pantheon or Hall of Valhalla in the Legends of Mortals. It is just an organization for the divine people to perform their own duties. Then you said that my authority comes from the Truth Society. Is it because I am a planeswalker? Brendel thought for a while, and it seemed like this was the only possibility. She had said that his bloodline was only an iron-ranked bloodline, and the only thing that couldn't be explained by the game system was the planeswalker system. Unexpectedly, Ovina shook her head. The members of the Truth Society are all planeswalkers, but planeswalkers are not necessarily members of the Truth Society. However, you are not wrong about one thing. The best planeswalkers are usually members of the Truth Society. Planeswalkers are the authority given to them by Martha. At first, this authority was exclusive to the Truth Society and the Tribunal. Later, it became more and more fragmented. Even some of the lesser divine people can become planeswalkers. The Odin, Tumen, and Kelsey that you are familiar with are such planeswalkers. Brando was stunned. He even forgot his previous question. Odin, Tumen, and Kelsey aren't the best planeswalkers? Then what kind of people are the best planeswalkers? Ovina smiled condescendingly. Even my previous master, the Knight of the Azure Sky, could only be considered a qualified planeswalker. As I said, only members of the Truth Society can be considered the best planeswalkers. But, no buts. I know you are curious, but you only need to know the history of the first generation of planeswalkers to understand. Although my knowledge is only a small part of the 6 eras, I can tell you responsibly that the first generation of planeswalkers were the people who created this world with Martha. Brando was stunned. For a moment, he couldn't say a word. The people who created the world with Martha, didn't that mean they were the creators of the world? Only now did he understand what Ovina meant by the best planeswalkers. Ovina continued, before the 6th era, planeswalkers could easily destroy the world and create it again. They also used this method to escape the first few nightfalls. Brando didn't raise too many questions about the 6th era that Ovina spoke of, even though this sentence was already overturned for the average scholar. In the more common chronology of the continent, scholars divided the past of Wound into 3 eras. One was the Chaos Era, and the other was the Dark Era. The Chaos Era and the D.R. Era were divided by the azure lance shattering the sky. Before that, it was the Chaos Era, and the latter was the era when the Dragon of Darkness ruled the land. After the War of the Holy Saints, the Dark Era ended, and the continent entered the First Era. Therefore, these 3 eras were the common knowledge of scholars. If someone were to say that Wound still had 6 eras before the azure lance shattered the sky in front of these people, then they would be looking at them like they were looking at a madman. However, Brando already knew the story before the nightfall in the game. He didn't know exactly how many eras there were, but at least he wouldn't be surprised if Ovina mentioned the 6th era. He was silent for a moment and decided not to dwell on his origins. Instead, he asked, then is the Truth Parliament related to the Truth Society? The so-called Truth Parliament is actually the highest council of the divine people. All the divine people are members of the Parliament. However, this Parliament was initiated by the Truth Society, and the members of the Truth Society are equivalent to the elders of the Parliament. That's why this Parliament is called the Truth Parliament. As if she understood that Brando still had questions, she continued to explain, before the age of mortals, the Truth Parliament was permanent, but due to certain events, this Parliament was cancelled after the fall of Babel Fortress. There was only one emergency law left, which is the so-called Article 172. Article 172. Yes, the full name is Article 172 of the United Laws. It states that if 3 divine people are present at the same time, and one of them initiates, then the Truth Parliament can be reconvened. However, this is only a temporary law. The reconvening of the Truth Parliament is only one of the votes. It doesn't mean anything. Then what's the use of it? Brando vaguely understood the cause and effect of the matter. It's mainly used to decide on some urgent issues. After all, the divine people wouldn't know that after the 6th war, our heritage would suffer such a great blow that it was on the verge of collapse. The mixed-blood divine people almost completely lost all knowledge of the past, and the Truth Parliament became a mere decoration. In other words, the Silver Queen somehow received a legacy of the past, or at least a fragment of it. She knows about the existence of the Truth Parliament. Brando thought that it was most likely from the final battle, or from Odin's legacy. He continued to ask, so she wants to reconvene the Parliament? Ovina nodded. According to Article 172, if she gathered 3 members, then Scarlet and I have no choice but to agree to her request. Scarlet's heritage comes from the Azure Knight, and the Azure Knight is the leader of the Gate of Arbitration. Our authority is to arbitrate and review the divine people's issues. Then it looks like the Silver Queen knows about this as well, or else she wouldn't value Scarlet so much. Ovina expressed her agreement. She nodded and said, but the decision of how much authority to grant is in the hands of Scarlet and me. This meeting can be a meeting with the highest authority, or it can also be a discussion with the lowest authority. Authority. What is authority? All the power of mortals comes from authority. You should understand that other than the witches who can draw upon the power of darkness, mortals are unable to directly draw upon magic power. But in reality, our entire world is built upon order. It was Martha who used the law of Tiamat to restrain the magic power of chaos. She used the elements to reassemble and form the physical world that we see. Of course, energy also follows this restriction. Ovina gazed at the crowd in the courtyard and said slowly, the knights and sorcerers you see, the power they possess comes from their understanding of the laws. Their understanding of the laws determines how much power they can draw from the web of order and what kind of power they can summon. That's for wizards and high priests. But isn't the power that swordsmen wield physically? Brando didn't understand. Wizards use the law to draw upon magic, high priests pray to a higher being to draw upon holy spells, and elementalists use the law to draw upon elements. He could understand that, but what kind of law did swordsmen draw upon? Before reaching the elemental level, swordsman's power was purely physical. So swordsmen don't have to go through the elemental level. Ovina countered with a question. Not to mention that your muscles, your hair, your bones, and the bodily fluids in your body are all made up of the elements and laws that make up this world. Your physical strength also has to follow the laws of physics of this world, doesn't it? She pointed at the palace knights. These people are usually the lucky ones. Because for mortals, the process of understanding the law is very long. The Black Iron people are born without the ability to wield the power of order. They can only learn and understand the many laws and orders that exist in our world. Many of them can only live their entire lives as mortals. And for the Gold and Silver people, from the moment they are born, they are often more powerful than many adult mortals. Is this because of the knowledge that came from the embryo? Some races may have this ability, but most of the Gold and Silver people's reproduction is similar to that of mortals. Where does their power come from? Ovina looked at him and asked word by word, this is the authority. It is the authority that the law of Tiamat grants to higher beings. They don't need to learn because the understanding of the law is integrated into their blood. It is like an instinct. For some of the higher beings, the authority itself is synonymous with order. For example, the divine people, you're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.